Chapter 1224. Peach Girl frowned slightly. She glanced at Lian Yi, but didn't say anything. She bowed to Long Sheng again, then turned around and flew back. Qin Yu hurried forwards. Senior apprentice, sister? Peach shook her head. It's fine. On the surface, she really looked fine. Apart from her expression becoming more indifferent and her eyes becoming a bit gloomy, there was nothing wrong with her. But Nishiyama Renichi was injured. The winner was already injured, so how could Peach Blossom Girl, who had her peach forest destroyed, remain unscathed? The more normal she appeared, the more uneasy Qin Yu felt. But Peach Maiden didn't want to say too much, and the current situation wasn't suitable. He could only take a deep breath and suppress all his thoughts. He turned around and looked at Lian Yi, who was standing in the air above the arena. After defeating Peach, he stood with his hands clasped behind his back. His black robe fluttered lightly as a powerful aura surged around him. Looking at Qin Yu, the corners of his lips curled up. With a calm and valiant attitude, he slowly said, "Everyone, is there anyone else who would like to give me some pointers? The wooden box is just below the stage. If you want it, feel free to make a move." These words were naturally directed at Qin Yu. Gather One was not the only one who understood this. The other cultivators in the hall were also very clear about it. How simple was this? Black Armor had been defeated with a single punch. The Princess of the Peach Garden had mastered spatial laws and even used the Peach Garden's great divine ability, 10 miles of peach blossoms, but she had still been defeated in the end. Everyone had witnessed Shishan Renichi's strength with their own eyes. Who would be so stubborn as to jump out and take the hammer of their own accord, seeking their own humiliation, unless, no matter how afraid someone was, no matter how afraid they were, they still had a reason to step on stage. For instance, Qin Yu in these people's eyes. In the eyes of everyone in the hall, Peach Maiden's battle with rejuvenation was to protect Qin Yu. In addition, when they were fighting for the Dragon Ball, Peach Maiden had appeared in the third match and cooperated with Qin Yu to easily win by cheating. Although he didn't want to face it, he couldn't help but admit that Peach Girl had treated Qin Yu extremely well. But it was precisely because of this that Qin Yu was placed in a difficult position. Peach Girl, who had always been loyal to him, had been defeated by Lian Yi. Even though she seemed unscathed, no one was stupid. Some people even speculated that Peach Girl had forcefully suppressed her injuries in order to prevent Qin Yu from worrying or feeling too much pressure. If that was really the case, Peach would undoubtedly suffer even greater harm because of this. Was such a Peach Girl worth a man's wrath? Of course it was worth it. It all depended on whether or not Qin Yu had the courage to do so. Many people in the hall finally reacted to the reason behind Lian Yi's actions, and they were all secretly impressed. In this battle, Qin Yu was the best. Lian Yi had enough methods to make him taste the taste of hell. If he retreated and didn't fight, although he wouldn't be able to personally teach him a lesson, he could still make Qin Yu a laughingstock in the circles of the Saint Dao. Even if Peach Maiden really did like Qin Yu, this matter was enough to create a gap between the two of them. Moreover, with how much the Yard Master doted on her daughter, how could she be satisfied with Qin Yu's actions? As long as the Yard Master was dissatisfied, the two of them would not be able to be together. Caught between a rock and a hard place, the more he thought about it, the more he felt it to be ingenious. Shishan Ryoichi's methods were indeed brilliant. Long Sheng frowned. He glanced at Qin Yu, who was standing in the audience, thinking that this boy was quite smart. He wouldn't do something stupid this time, right? If the Saint Dao didn't appear, then throughout the boundless Vastion world, the number of people that could go against refinement could be counted on one's fingers. If he stepped onto the stage now, besides being beaten up, what else could he do? As Qin Yu looked into Lian Yi's eyes, he could clearly feel the coldness and condescension contained within. It was like a great dragon soaring through the highest heavens looking down at a toad in the mud. Reason told Qin Yu that it wasn't worth risking his life against Lian Yi. After all, things like face weren't worth anything. But for some unknown reason, this clear and firm thought was now violently shaken. There was a sort of pent-up anger, an urge to vent his anger, and it was becoming stronger and stronger. Why was this happening? People couldn't lie to themselves. What appeared in Qin Yu's mind was Lien Yi looking at Peach Maiden. His eyes were so hot that they seemed to be burning, and his naked desire to possess her was undisguised. He could ignore Peach Maiden, but Ning Ling and Yu Qi were still part of him. This was related to Qin Yu. To put it bluntly, Lien Yi was fanatically pursuing Qin Yu's women, or at least a small portion of them. Peach Maiden suddenly said, "Qin Yu, come back." On the arena stage, Lien Yi laughed. "Junior apprentice, Sister Peach Maiden, there is no need to worry." He just took a few glances. "Junior apprentice Brother Qin Yu is ignorant and fearless, so I won't lower myself to his level. As long as he doesn't step onto the stage on his own initiative, I won't bother with him." What magnanimity, what pride! Qin Yu suddenly laughed. He felt that he had underestimated the situation. He was the 9th child of the Peach Garden, and in the entire Vastion world, he had a massive mountain behind him. When it came to comparing backgrounds, besides rulers, no one else was afraid of him. In other words, no matter how heavy his attacks were or how excessive his actions were, it wasn't a big deal. Moreover, the Garden Master definitely wouldn't stand idly by today's matter. As for trump cards, F*CK your mother's forbearance, F*CK your mother's low profile. Someone has already set their eyes on my woman. If I don't beat him up, am I going to wait for my head to turn green? Of course, he couldn't say this reason out loud. Luckily, Qin Yu had other options. After all, this was also a chance for him to gain the favor of the Garden Master and Peach Maiden and get closer to them. Qin Yu took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. He cupped his hands together and said, "Senior apprentice Brother Lien, aren't you very proud of yourself? You like me the most, but you will suffer if I don't." Lien Yi's lips curled up. "Junior apprentice Brother Qin, I don't understand." Qin Yu said lightly, "I've already made things so clear, but Senior apprentice Brother Lien Yi still doesn't understand. It seems that you really don't have enough brains. I say, only someone who doesn't have enough brains would dare to show disrespect to the Garden Master in front of so many people." The hall suddenly fell silent. Firstly, they were shocked by how bold Qin Yu was. He actually dared to speak to Lien Yi with such an attitude. Even if he could avoid today's EC arena, could he avoid the coming days and nights? Didn't a loose tongue cause trouble? Also, there was the matter of the Garden Master. Lien Yi had mocked Qin Yu for his good looks. Although he didn't say it explicitly, his words had implicated the Garden Master. This matter could be big or small. After being exposed in front of so many people, it was indeed difficult to deal with. But Lien Yi's response surpassed everyone's expectations. The smile on his face widened, and he didn't seem the least bit anxious or restless. The most useless thing in the world is a flexible tongue, because compared to strength, it is worthless. If Junior Apprentice Brother Qin can defeat me, then whatever you say will be true. But if you can't, what can you do to me if you say it 10,000 times? Arrogance, and blatant disdain without the slightest bit of concealment. This was Lien Yi's true appearance after he removed the restrictions of today's EC longevity banquet and the outer appearance he wore in front of Peach Girl. But one couldn't deny the power contained in these words. In the world of cultivators, strength reigned supreme. Qin Yu snapped his fingers, his face full of praise. Senior apprentice Brother Lien Yi is right, absolutely right. He turned and cupped his hands together. Senior apprentice sister, do you really want that wooden box? Peach Girl sucked in a deep breath. Qin Yu smiled. I haven't been in Peach Garden for long, so I haven't spent much time with Senior apprentice sister. But I'm not afraid to tell you that I am someone who fears death. So, I won't joke around with my life. Senior apprentice sister, please rest assured. He met Peach Girl's gaze and was silent for several breaths of time. Then, he slowly said, if Senior apprentice sister is willing to believe me, then tell me the truth. Do you really want that wooden box? For some unknown reason, as Peach Girl looked at the smiling Qin Yu in front of her heart raced. An inexplicable emotion rose from the depths of her heart. She wanted to refuse, because no matter what she said, it was impossible for Qin Yu to be Lien Yi's match. But as the words reached the tip of her tongue and she met Qin Yu's eyes, she couldn't bring herself to say them. That's enough. Senior apprentice sister, your eyes have already given me the answer. Qin Yu's smile brightened. Then, I will go fetch the wooden box and give it to senior apprentice sister. Crazy. At this moment, everyone who looked at Qin Yu had the same thought in their minds. If one wasn't a madman, who would dare to say such words to Lian Yi? This was no longer arrogance. Rather, it was a loss of the most basic judgment of one's own strength. To give the wooden box to Peach Girl and say such words meant that he didn't place Lian Yi in his eyes at all. This was the same as telling everyone that he would win before he even stepped onto the arena stage. On the arena stage, Breed 1 suddenly laughed heartily. He laughed heartily and to his heart's content. But at this moment, everyone who heard his laughter couldn't help but shiver. Then they all had the same thought. Qin Yu's fate would be very, very miserable. Junior apprentice brother Qin, let me repeat what I just said. The most useless thing in the world is an incomparably flexible tongue. I hope that you don't just have the gift of the gab. So, get on the stage and use your actions to tell junior sister Peach Blossom that you indeed have the ability to help her. Also, let everyone in this hall know exactly how powerful you are. Lian Yi's voice suddenly deepened. I will wait for you here. Qin Yu nodded. Okay. When he needed to speak, he had to. But when he didn't want to speak, a single word was enough. One step up, one step down. Space twisted and Qin Yu suddenly vanished. Then, he reappeared on the arena stage. Just like Peach Girl, this was the space laws. Peach Garden's new disciple, Miss Ninth, had already comprehended the space laws. This wasn't a secret in the small circle of saints. But when Qin Yu displayed it today, many people were startled. Although it seemed like a simple, instantaneous movement, and his actions were calm and unhurried, this meant that he had profound attainments in the space laws. But to Lian Yi, this didn't have any deterrent effect at all. This was just a mere space laws. He had already grasped them. He faintly smiled and said, Junior apprentice brother Qin isn't afraid of wasting your strength. When you get beaten up later, don't cry too miserably. Qin Yu said without expression, I don't think I will. I think senior apprentice brother Lian Yi is old enough that he wouldn't do something so shameful. Lian Yi narrowed his eyes. Junior apprentice brother Qin, please. Qin Yu didn't nod. He directly attacked. Chapter 1225. A roar seemed to have traversed time and space to arrive, and it carried an arrogant and overbearing might that had experienced the vicissitudes of countless years and fully displayed the domineering aura of a top hunter. An abyssal titan phantom appeared above his head. It followed Qin Yu's attack and punched forwards. In the grand hall, everyone revealed a look of disappointment. Although Qin Yu's performance seemed crazy to them, he was far too calm. In addition to his incomparably tough attitude when facing Lian Yi, they subconsciously felt some hope that they shouldn't have. But now, as they saw Qin Yu attack, the faint hope in their hearts instantly vanished. When Qin Yu defeated Su Shi with a single punch, this punch was breathtaking. It caused the hearts of the cultivators in the hall to shake and countless waves to rise in their hearts. But now, facing Lian Yi, he still used the same punch. This was far too laughable. That's right, it was laughable. Su Shi was far worse than Black Armor, let alone Lian Yi, who had severely wounded Black Armor with a single punch. Sure enough, Qin Yu was crazy. He wanted to use such a punch to fight the despair-inducing Lian Yi. He would inevitably pay a heavy price for his actions. They couldn't figure it out? Such a Qin Yu only had these few methods. So how could he dare to provoke Smelting One again and again? And now, he really stepped onto the arena stage. Some people revealed looks of understanding and guessed the truth. From Qin Yu's words, it wasn't hard to see that he had seen through Lian Yi's brilliant methods. In a dilemma, he chose to take a step further. If he didn't step onto the arena and create a rift between him and Peach Girl, he would anger the Garden Master, and he would lose everything he had today. If he took a risk and stepped onto the arena to fight, even if he couldn't win, with his current status, would Lian Yi dare to kill him? At most, he would suffer a bit. Compared to what he would pay and what he would lose, it wasn't worth mentioning at all. Thus, he would make the more advantageous choice. Taking a step back, even if Lian was bold enough to kill Qin, today was the Dragon Sage's birthday banquet, and Qin had been ordered to come here. How could the Dragon Sage possibly watch on helplessly as he was killed? After thinking this through, everyone looked at Qin on the arena and couldn't help but sigh. Although this brat Qin character wasn't too great, he was quite smart. Lian also thought of this. As he looked at Qin, he suddenly felt that this was laughable. Some people were just like that. They liked to speculate about others from their own point of view. What they didn't dare do, they assumed that others wouldn't dare to do. What they couldn't do, they assumed that others wouldn't be able to do it. He had purposely provoked him with words so that he would suffer a round of punches and kicks. He had used his miserable appearance in exchange for Peach Girl's pity and even the Yardmaster's good impression of him. He had even taken the opportunity to express his sincerity towards Peach Girl. Look, I clearly know that I'm no match for him, but I'm still unyielding and willing to fight. I'm doing this for Peach Blossom and to protect the Yardmaster. It was indeed bright and majestic. But do you really think that I wouldn't think of all this and would give you such an opportunity? Breed One suddenly smiled. His face was bright, but his eyes were exceptionally cold. They were so cold that they were like water flowing quietly under a layer of ice. They emitted a bone-chilling coldness. In fact, my ultimate goal is for you to ascend to this arena. Once you've ascended, don't even think about going down. Killing Qin would indeed cause a great deal of trouble. But so what? The relationship between the West Mountain and the Peach Garden was so bad that it could not be detested. At most, he could hide for a period of time and ask his father to come to a compromise with the Yardmaster. At most, he would have to pay a small price. Could this matter really trigger a war between the two holy lands that would never end until one side was dead? Qin didn't have such power. Even if he did, the true saints would each take a step back. When one's strength and realm reached their level, the only ones they could look up to were those in the ruler realm. Everyone else didn't have the qualifications to make them risk damaging their great Tao or even perishing. As for the Dragon Sage who was watching the battle, if his true body was here, he could suppress everything with just a thought. But today in the Great Hall, he was only an avatar. He was confident that he could kill Qin on the spot before the Dragon Sage could make a move. Looking up, his gaze swept over the Abyssal Titan. Then, Breed one step forward. Just like when he defeated Black Armor, he punched out with a seemingly slow but actually fast punch. This punch seemed as if the world itself was collapsing. A vast and mighty strength erupted from his fist, sweeping out in all directions. Within the Great Hall, everyone felt their hearts skip a beat. Feeling the strength of this punch, their faces were filled with shock. When the 10 miles of peach blossoms were broken and Breed One was trapped within, they could only vaguely feel it. They hadn't experienced it directly. Now, they could finally see for themselves the true strength of Breed One's punch. It was so terrifying that it left everyone in despair. Peach Girl frowned, but she immediately regained her composure. She looked at the giant dragon eye in the crystal wall. She knew that if Qin was in danger, the Dragon Sage would definitely intervene. Since he didn't stop Qin, it meant that Breed One's punch might not be able to injure him. The facts proved that Peach Maiden's guess wasn't wrong. Just when everyone was shocked by the terrifying might of Lian Yi's punch and believed that Qin was about to be blasted out of the arena with broken bones and torn tendons, another roar suddenly sounded out. It was the Abyssal Titan above Qin Yu's head. The Abyssal Titan reared its head back and roared. Its eyes instantly turned black, giving off a similar feeling to Breed One's black robes. However, it was purer and more unfathomable. It was as if it was connected to another strange world that no one knew where. In fact, it could even pull the entire world in front of it into that strange world. And this was just the beginning. The darkness in the Abyssal Titan's eyes rapidly spread to other parts of its body. It was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it had completely turned black. The Abyssal Titan, which already had a terrifying aura and was releasing the aura of a top predator, now became even more terrifying. It was like a black hole, constantly releasing an icy cold and destructive aura. Within the crystal wall, the dragon sage's eyes exploded with a sharp light. He couldn't hide the shock in his eyes. As Peach Girl thought, he didn't stop breed one because he felt an unusual fluctuation coming from Qin Yu's body. Moreover, he believed in Qin Yu's words. As someone who was afraid of death, he wouldn't joke around with his life. Thus, the dragon sage decided to wait. He wanted to know what kind of strength Qin Yu, who he was already incomparably satisfied with and admired, was hiding. Now the dragon sage saw it. It was an incomparably pure darkness that reached the source. There wasn't a single impurity within it, and it could submerge and swallow everything. Only a true divine existence that had crossed the sea of bitterness and reached the other shore, achieving their own great Tao, would understand what this scene before them meant. The world was vast and boundless. The vast Yang world was vast and nearly infinite. But in this endless world, in all directions, there were two things that had existed since time immemorial and had never truly disappeared: time and space. Thus, they were believed to be the key to reaching the highest great Tao. They represented a cultivator's future and potential. Reality proved this to be the case. Space was the cornerstone of the Saint Tao. As for the great Tao of time, it was the stepping stone to pursuing the illusory and supreme ruler. If one couldn't do so, it was nearly impossible to enter. But besides that, there was another explanation. The two eternal existences of the vast Yang world were eternal light and endless darkness. Compared to the great Taos of space and time that everyone knew about, the powers of light and darkness were far more ordinary and inferior. This was because there were many cultivators in this world that could control light and darkness. There were even some special and powerful species that were born as the incarnations of light and darkness. But light and darkness were also divided into different grades. The lower grades of the power of light and darkness were indeed ordinary and could be easily grasped by cultivators. But the difficulty of obtaining the higher grades of the power of light and darkness was no less than perceiving the great Tao of space or time. In fact, the difficulty of obtaining them was even higher. Light and darkness could be seen everywhere. They accompanied almost all living beings throughout their lives. It was precisely because they could be seen everywhere that it was even more difficult to see their true faces. But now, Dragon Saint could see the highest level source substance in Qin Yu's body, darkness. Although it was still a bit lacking, one couldn't forget that this junior only had a divine realm cultivation. For him to have such achievements was already enough to shock everyone. Even Longsheng was among them. It was no wonder that this boy still dared to challenge him, even after witnessing refining Yi's tyrannical strength. Everything could be explained now. Qin Yu, who controlled darkness, was strong enough to rival him. Longsheng took a deep breath. The depths of his eyes were incomparably calm. But under this calm surface, there was a scorching heat that could burn everything to ashes. He was very sure that the yardmaster didn't know that Qin Yu had already grasped the darkness source. Otherwise, she would never have allowed him to come to the EC. Even if he came, she would have strictly ordered him not to reveal anything. This was because the yardmaster knew very well what kind of dragon he was. Although saying this was a little self-deprecating, it was the truth. Moreover, Longsheng couldn't care less about it now. Before this, he was still a little worried about whether keeping Qin Yu here would incur the yardmaster's dissatisfaction and cause a series of troubles. After all, he had personally experienced the yardmaster's strength. Although they hadn't fought for many years, he believed that she wouldn't disappoint him. But now, Longsheng didn't think about it anymore. Even if he had to fight with the yardmaster again, he had to keep Qin Yu here. This was his only chance. After this, the yardmaster would never allow anyone to have any ideas about Qin Yu. Boom! An earth-shattering noise accompanied by a terrifying force swept across. The arena instantly fell apart, shattering into countless pieces that shot in all directions. Then, one after another, the densely packed roars that reached the depths of one's soul. It was like a meteor dragging a long, burning tail in the night sky, crashing heavily onto the ground. All the space barriers appeared, and the fragments of the arena crashed into them, creating countless cracks that spread in all directions like a dense spider web. Along with the terrifying roars, the faces of everyone in the hall turned pale, including those of the first wife of a true saint. They could clearly sense the terrifying force that was being released crazily from within the space barriers. It was enough to severely injure them in an instant. They might even be torn to shreds and destroyed in both body and soul. In other words, if it were any of them standing on the arena now, they might be killed. How could this be? How could this be? The roars continued in their ears, but in their hearts, even more terrifying waves were set off. They rumbled and tumbled, causing their minds to go blank. They could accept Lin Yi's strength, because for many years, he had been the most famous young powerhouse in the circle of the divine path. He was regarded as a proud son of heaven who was most likely to succeed in breaking through to the divine path. Moreover, he had previously defeated Black Armor and Peach Girl as a foundation, which had forged his unparalleled momentum. But what about Qinyu? Although he had defeated Su Shi, could Su Shi be compared to Black Armor and Peach Girl? Both sides were at least a few levels apart. But now, Qinyu, whom they had thought was forced into the arena and would definitely be beaten up, had actually taken on Lin Yi's punch head-on and was not at a disadvantage at all. Although everyone had already felt the difference when the Abyss Titan completed his dark transformation while roaring, they still wouldn't dare to believe such an outcome if they hadn't seen it with their own eyes. But it didn't matter whether they believed it or not. What was important was that this was the truth. It was an unquestionable truth in front of everyone. Peach Girl's eyes lit up as she stared at Qinyu's back on the arena. As the first wife of the Peach Garden's first wife, she had a special status and knew far more than the others. The origin of darkness, the Tao of darkness. Not only had Qinyu mastered the spatial law, but he had also reached an extremely shocking level in another aspect. How'd he do it? Back then, he had only been ordinary. How many years had it been since then? In such a short period of time, he had actually caused a person to undergo such a tremendous change. Peach Girl had seen many geniuses and even monstrous existences, not to mention those that were far away. Just the eldest senior apprentice brother and second senior apprentice brother in the Peach Garden were freaks amongst freaks. But their freaks still needed a massive amount of time to recover. But what about Qinyu? From the time he was born until today, could all of his cultivation time be as long as eldest senior apprentice brother's seclusion? Could it be as long as second senior apprentice brother's fight? Could this be the reason why her father had uncharacteristically wanted her to enter the Peach Garden and had even intentionally or unintentionally allowed Qinyu to approach her? At this moment, the cold and indifferent Peach Girl's heart was in complete chaos. Also in chaos were the rice paper, Ruan Jing, the sword cultivator, and Zhou Lei, the four cultivators of a certain generation. Before, the feeling that Qinyu gave them was that they were chasing him with all their strength, but were still falling further and further behind. But now, this feeling had become that he had soared into the heavens, leaving everyone else far behind. How could he be so strong? These words tumbled in the hearts of the four people. Finally, they turned into helpless moans and groans. When they were in the endless sea, although Qinyu had revealed strength that shook them, it hadn't reached this degree. No one would believe that Qinyu's sudden increase in strength came from the short period of seclusion he had entered the Peach Garden, because this was simply impossible. No one could have such an astonishing increase in strength in such a short period of time, unless he had been seized by someone. But in the Peach Garden, right under the eyes of the Peach Garden Master, who could accomplish this beside a ruler? And would a supreme ruler use a method to seize the body of Qinyu, who in his eyes couldn't even be considered an ant? Of course it would be a joke. Thus, in the eyes of the rice paper, Ruan Jing, the sword cultivator, and Zhou Lei, the only possibility was that Qinyu had been hiding his strength all this time. When he was in the endless sea, he hadn't used his full strength at all. This was the only reasonable and most likely guess. Thus, The four cultivators of a certain generation all had extremely complex expressions. Chapter 1226. The reason was simple. In the endless sea, Chinyu had been hiding his strength, so who could guarantee that today was his true limit? As someone with a criminal record, it was really hard to believe. If it was true, then how strong would he be? In the first place, he had already felt that he was so far behind that he could not even see his shadow. At this moment, he felt that the gap between them was like the difference between the clouds and the mud. Between Chinyu and them, who were the native cultivators, who were the true cultivators of a certain generation. I can't think, I can't think, I can't think, I can't breathe. The Tao of darkness. Breed one slowly said. His eyes were solemn and dignified. When his gaze fell on Chinyu, he couldn't help but frown. He never imagined that a mere Chinyu would possess such formidable strength. The law of space wasn't much, but the dark energy that his father had called the most terrifying and unfathomable in the world definitely couldn't be underestimated. Chinyu had actually controlled it. Originally, Lien Yijin didn't believe the rumors that the relationship between Chinyu and Peach Maiden had been approved by the Yardmaster. At the very most, it was just that Peach Blossom had feelings for him. But now, it seemed that it was very likely to be true. This was because Chinyu's talent was enough to be called heaven-defying. Even if the Peach Blossom girl had an exalted status, she would still be more than enough to match him. Since this was the case, no matter what price he had to pay, he had to die. Peach Girl was the woman he had chosen, and she would accompany him through the endless years until he reached the peak of heaven and earth. That's right, Chinyu, who had erupted with the power of darkness and shocked everyone present, could still be killed in Refinement Eye's eyes. See gazing, see gazing, see gazing. These three steps represented three realms. Each realm represented a shocking disparity in strength. He was only one step away from entering the ocean. If it wasn't for the fact that he wanted to make up for his flaws and make himself perfect to lay a solid foundation for breaking through to the Nirvana realm, Lien would have taken this step a long time ago. The outside world only knew that he was strong, but they did not know that Lien was strong to the point where he was unhindered in the divine path. The so-called unobstructed meant that the path ahead was smooth and unobstructed, and the saint path was within reach. At the unhindered realm, even if he didn't enter the bitter sea, he could barely use some of the power of the saint path. Of course, there were some risks in doing so. It could even cause Refinement 1 to be damaged and delay the time to become a saint. But in his eyes, it was all worth it. Killing Chinyu wasn't just killing a competitor for the Peach Maiden, but also destroying the future of Peach Garden. Both the West Mountain and the Peach Garden were currently restrained, but sooner or later, there would be a battle between them. This was something that had already been decided many, many years ago, when Sage Scholatry and the Yardmistress had each reached the other shore. The killing intent in Refinement 1's heart surged like a tidal wave. But for this matter, they still needed to make other preparations. Chinyu's strength had surpassed their expectations, and the difficulty of killing him had also increased. If the Dragon Sage avatar within the temple were to take action at a critical moment, there was a high chance he could change the situation and save Chinyu's life. Since Lien was determined to make a move, he would not leave behind any hidden dangers. He took a deep breath and his lips curled up. I take back what I said earlier. Junior Brother Chin, other than having a nimble tongue, your strength is also not bad. Chinyu had a calm expression. Senior Apprentice Brother Refinement 1. What do you want to say? Just get straight to the point. Things like clouds and fog are difficult for your mind, and I'm tired just listening to them. The space suddenly became quiet. However, at this moment, there was no one who would look at Chinyu with surprise, mockery, or a gaze that implied that he didn't know what was good for him. Because Chinyu had already used his actions to prove that he did indeed have the qualifications to confront Lien Yi. It was very realistic, but this was the reality. Lien Yi's eyelids twitched. The smile on his face disappeared and was replaced with a cold expression. All right, then I'll be straightforward. If we continue to fight, I will use some hidden cards, but these hidden cards will injure me. Since I have already suffered injuries, I cannot return empty-handed. So, Chinyu, if you have the guts, then make a contract with me. Today, on the arena, unless one side begs for mercy, no one can interfere. It was indeed very direct. Peach Girl clenched her fists. Chinyu. Chinyu turned around and looked at her. His expression was calm. Senior Apprentice Sister, don't worry. Since Senior Apprentice Brother Refinement 1 is in such a good mood, how can the Peach Garden retreat? He turned around and sneered. It's just that killing is blind. If I hold back, I fear that Sage Scholatry will blame me. Liani laughed, his voice shaking the heavens. Junior Apprentice Brother Chin, don't worry. If I die today, it means that my skills are inferior. The West Mountain will not pursue this matter. After he finished speaking, he looked at Chinyu. Good. Senior Apprentice Brother Refinement is so courageous. So, Chinyu, should be the same. Even if I die on the arena today, the Peach Garden will not vent their anger on me. He turned around and cupped his hands together. I ask Lord Dragon Sage to be the witness. Lien bowed. I asked Dragon Sage to be the witness. After a brief moment of silence, the dignified voice of the Dragon Sage echoed out from behind the crystal walls. Agreed. As the voice fell, the space within the Longevity Feast Hall rapidly expanded once more. An invisible strength spread out, pushing away the people watching. Translucent chains appeared from nothingness, like swimming dragons. They wove together and formed a terrifying blockade. Since his goal had been achieved, Lien Yi's eyes locked on Chinyu. He no longer concealed his emotions, and icy cold, killing intent erupted from his body. He turned his hand and pointed between his eyebrows. The sound of something shattering instantly came from within his body. At the same time, a terrifying aura that shook the heavens and the earth erupted. It was as if a giant beast had broken free from its cage within his body. The chains in the air began to shake. They rubbed against each other, constantly emitting sounds. Peach Girl suddenly stood up. She could no longer maintain the indifference in her eyes. Saint Dao. This was the aura of the Saint Dao. She turned to look at the crystal walls. Lord Dragon Sage. The Dragon Sage's voice was low and deep. Both sides have signed a contract. If Chinyu doesn't beg for mercy, I will not interfere. A true saint's words carried enormous weight. They resonated with the heavens and earth and wouldn't easily break their promises. This was also the reason why after Lien Yi received a response, he directly attacked Chinyu without worrying about being interrupted. As Peach Girl spoke and the Dragon Sage responded, Lien Yi, who had opened up a small part of his seal and borrowed a portion of the power of the Saint Dao, attacked. He was only worried that Chinyu wouldn't be able to withstand it and would admit defeat. Thus, he didn't hesitate at all. He lifted his hand and pressed down. To borrow the power of the Saint Dao without entering the sea of suffering was already a violation of the rules. Thus, the moment he attacked, before he could even injure Chinyu, Lien Yi's face paled and a trace of blood leaked out from the corners of his lips. Before hurting others, he had already hurt himself. The backlash was stronger than he imagined. But the good news was that he could still withstand it. At most, he would have to pay a higher price. This was the power of the Saint Dao. It was powerful and unrestrained, as if it existed in the vast world and wasn't bound in the least. Bang! Space violently shook. It was as if all of the air was instantly compressed into a mass, turning into an invisible mountain that crashed down. This strike was grand and vast. It came from all directions and couldn't be dodged or escaped. It was as if it came from the heavens and earth itself. This was because when one reached the Saint Dao, their great Dao would condense, and they could be regarded as the will of a part of the world. Of course, the part of the world here had a different meaning from the words, but there wasn't much difference in essence. With the might of the Saint Dao, all living beings below the Saint Dao were nothing but ants. They weren't even worth mentioning and could be annihilated with a wave of their hand. What about the space laws? What about the Tao of darkness? It was precisely because Lien Yi knew this, and after seeing the power of darkness, that he was confident he could kill Chinyu. Although he wasn't a saint, he could still use the power of the Saint Tao. Qin Yu's heartbeat sped up and his soul instinctively screamed. A strong sense of crisis assaulted him, and he could smell the scent of death. It was decaying and cold, filled with an aura that left one in despair. Roar! Above his head, the completely black abyssal titan let out a heaven-shaking roar. Then, a shocking scene occurred. One of its eyes instantly turned from darkness to light. During the entire transformation process, there was no pause at all. It was like a great burning sun had suddenly descended. The abyssal titan's eye that had turned into light released an endlessly dazzling light. This light spread over its body, expelling half of the darkness. Or to be more precise, half of its body that had already turned into darkness instantly turned into a carrier of light. Every strand of hair became transparent and constantly emitted light. At this moment, the abyssal titan transformed once more. With a vertical line between its eyebrows as a boundary, one side was the darkest night of the world, a darkness that could swallow all. The other side was a sea of light, warm, bright, and dazzling light, able to illuminate all things. Darkness and light, these two were polar opposites. But now, they both appeared on the abyssal titan's body. The two perfectly coexisted. Where light and darkness touched, one could clearly see their circulation and transformation. Light was darkness, darkness was light. Of course, the abyssal titan that had light and darkness as one could be seen by everyone. But the transformation between light and darkness was something only an extremely small number of people could sense. This involved one's control of the rules, understanding of the world, as well as one's own soul and cultivation boundary. Dragon Sage, Peach Maiden, Lien One, as well as that ordinary-looking middle-aged man beside him, they were all witnesses to the transformation between light and darkness. Peach Maiden and Lien One were better off. Their hearts were shaking, filled with incredulity and absurdity. But they couldn't clearly understand just what this represented. But Dragon Sage was well aware that the ordinary-looking middle-aged man, upon seeing the sharp light explode in the depths of his eyes, likely also knew. Light and darkness as one. This was the legendary light and darkness as one. Dragon Sage suddenly felt that the world had changed. Qin Yu was only a mere Divine Realm Junior. If he hadn't touched the mark left behind by it and not died, he wouldn't have had the qualifications to obtain its attention. However, such a junior, who was theoretically pitifully weak and could easily pierce through a dozen transparent holes with a random claw of his, had actually overturned the definition and label that the Dragon Saint had given him time and time again. Again and again, he had revealed an even more formidable background. Now, he had even reached the legendary light and darkness as one. That's right, Qin Yu was indeed very weak right now. Even if he comprehended space and grasped light and darkness, Dragon Sage could still easily kill him. This was an absolute disparity in strength. But as long as Qin Yu didn't die and was given enough time to grow, it wouldn't take too long. Perhaps in 100 years, or even 300 years, there would inevitably be another giant-level existence in vast Yang world. What was a giant? To cross the sea of bitterness and reach the other shore, to condense the transcendent great Tao, to truly transcend and stand proudly above the world, to exist eternally and never be destroyed. This was a true saint, also known as a giant. Huchi, behind the crystal wall, hundreds of people gasped for breath like broken bellows. Moreover, there were hundreds of them together, all of them desperately pulling at the air. With light and darkness as one, there was no need to mention Qin Yu's potential. Peach Garden would never give up. If they wanted to keep Qin Yu here, there would surely be a great battle. Pa! Several sharp claws sank deep into the ground. Dragon Sage looked up, revealing a pair of blood-red eyes that surged with madness. If they had to fight, they would fight. In the future, if the East Sea could have two true saints that could suppress the world and deter vast Yang world, any price was worth it. Chapter 12:27. Light and darkness coexisted as one abyssal titan roared into the sky. The sound waves rolled out and formed a visible impact. Boom! Like an axe in the darkness, it broke through the endless chaos. The earth-shattering sound entered everyone's ears with unparalleled momentum. Chinyu spread out his arms in a circle. At this time, his arms suddenly trembled and tiny sounds constantly echoed out. Starting from his fingers, countless wounds began to crack open on his exposed flesh and blood. Dark red blood seeped out, instantly soaking his robe. It gathered at the corners of his clothes and dripped to the ground. His expression was calm, as if he did not feel the terrifying pressure and pain from the cracks in his arms. Crash! Crash! The translucent chains intertwined with each other, forming a terrifying blockade. Now it seemed to fall into a storm, violently shaking. With Chinyu and the abyssal titan phantom above his head as the center, a sound wave that could be seen with the naked eye spread out like ripples on water. Now, it was like a giant stone had smashed into it, crushing everything and rushing towards Chinyu. His arms trembled more and more violently. The cracks on his flesh increased in number. Pa! Pa! More and more beads of blood fell to the ground, dyeing Chinyu's feet red. His expression was as calm as ever, but his eyes were growing brighter and brighter. His black eyes flashed with coldness. His white eyes flickered with a scorching heat. The power of light and darkness was not only used for defense, but it was omnipresent. It could also be omnipotent. As the invisible boulder came crashing down, sweeping away everything in its path, Chinyu suddenly shouted out loud and tightened his arms around himself. Boom! Boom! Incomparably dense, almost continuous loud noises came out. It was like a machine digging a tunnel, violently moving forward. It was sharp enough and incomparably powerful, but the rocks along the way were extremely hard, producing intense friction with it. The analogy was not too appropriate, but it was roughly like this. Refining one saint's strike was a machine digging a tunnel, and Chinyu's arms were the stones that sealed the light and darkness. The rumbling became louder and louder, like rolling thunder. The faces of everyone in the hall became paler and paler, without any trace of blood. Before, when Chinyu had forcefully resisted Lien Yi's attack, they thought that there was a high chance that they would be killed, but now they could remove the words high chance from their minds. He would die. He would definitely die, and it would be an incomparably miserable death. Not a single bone would be left behind. Xianji, Ruanjing, Sword Xiao, and Zhou Lei were all wailing in their hearts. As cultivators of the same generation as them, how could these two freaks be so powerful? One of them had yet to enter the divine path, but he was able to exert some of the power of the divine path. The other was only at the immortal state, but he had mastered the integration of light and darkness. Living in the same era as these two people was simply a tragedy. Even if they cultivated with all their might, could they catch up? Most likely, even if they were to work hard to the point of losing their lives, they would only be able to look at their backs from afar. They would never be able to chase after them after they soared into the sky. The dragon girl suddenly felt a little cold and subconsciously hugged herself. She subconsciously tried to recall what she had been doing recently. The more he thought about it, the paler his face became. Then, he felt even colder, as if he had fallen into an ice cave. She had kicked an iron plate. Moreover, it was the thickest and heaviest kind. If Chinyu came to retaliate in the future, would she be able to stop him? The answer was, of course, to deny it. Could it be that she would hide in the East Sea for the rest of her life, not daring to take a single step out? Thinking of this tragic possibility, the dragon girl hugged herself even tighter. As the loud bangs became increasingly loud, Lien Yi frowned. He couldn't help but admit that Chinyu had given him another pleasant surprise. Integration of light and darkness. Although he didn't fully understand what this meant, when he saw the abyssal titan easily transform between light and darkness, he instinctively felt an intense sense of fear and unease. This boy, just how many cards were hidden in his hands? Every time he erupted with a greater strength, Chinyu was able to resist it. The feeling he gave off was that he would never be able to touch his true limits. Lien Yi's heart was strong, and his will was firm. But even he couldn't help but instinctively feel a bit of disappointment, powerlessness, and uncertainty. Such a Qin Yu. Could he really kill him? He took a deep breath. His powerful will instantly crushed all of the weak thoughts in his heart. His eyes became firm once more. He was Shishan Lien Yi, a peerless, proud son of heaven who had reached the edge of the sea of bitterness and was unhindered by the divine path. In his self-damaging state, who could compete with him unless a divine path descended? Although integration of light and darkness was strong, with Qin Yu's strength, it would be extremely difficult for him to display it. How long could he last? The final victor would inevitably be him. It was just that this might require him to pay a greater price in exchange for an even greater divine path might. But compared to killing Qin Yu, who was so powerful and had endless potential, what was this? Qin Yu had to die. Thinking of this, Lien Yi flipped his hand without hesitation. His finger fell between his eyebrows once more. Kacha with another light sound, the seal opened a little more. The incomparably powerful aura within Lien Yi's body, like that of a giant beast awakening, crazily rose once more. Layers upon layers of ripples appeared. The invisible boulder that was blocked by the power of light and darkness instantly rose in momentum. Bang! All the resistance was instantly tore apart. The invisible boulder came crashing down. This was the might of the divine path. It contained the will of the divine path and a killing intent that could tear apart one's body and annihilate one's soul. At this moment, Qin Yu coughed. Blood flowed out from every orifice of his head. But between his black and white eyes, there was a burst of light. Now was the time. He had entered the sea of bitterness and was unhindered by the divine path. Yet, he sealed himself and didn't enter it. Lien Yi's purpose was to make up for his own flaws. He wanted to enter the sea of bitterness with perfect talent and lay the foundation for reaching the other shore and becoming a true divine. But just like how he didn't enter the divine path and forcefully borrowed part of the might of the divine path, this was a cheating method that was not allowed by the rules of the world. Thus, before Lien Yi hurt others, he hurt himself first. This was because he forcefully borrowed the might of the divine path, and also because sealing himself violated the will of the world. Qin Yu didn't want to see him suffer so much, so he wanted to help him. He wanted him to step into the sea of bitterness and truly become a divine path. The moment he stepped into the sea of bitterness, because Lien Yi forcefully borrowed the might of the divine path and sealed himself, he would be punished by the world without any preparation. And that was Qin Yu's chance. Lien Yi wanted to kill him and wanted to kill him. Qin Yu was well aware of this. If someone wanted to kill him, it wasn't Qin Yu's style to remain indifferent. Thus, he also wanted to kill someone. This was why he followed Lien Yi's intentions and provoked him to say that life and death on the arena stage were determined by fate and that he wouldn't pursue the matter afterwards. From that moment on, Qin Yu's killing intent stirred. It was just that Lien Yi was too strong to the point that he might not be able to kill him even if he used his full strength. In order to kill him, Qin Yu had to either erupt with an even greater strength, or he had to make Lien Yi fall into a weakened state. He didn't need to be in a weakened state for too long. To Qin Yu, that was enough. And now, the time had arrived. Qin Yu roared out loud. The abyssal titan above his head reared back its head and roared. It punched out. Light and darkness wove together around its body. A wild strength erupted like a volcano. Qin Yu wasn't willing to admit that he could only take a beating and not fight back. This time, he wanted to take the initiative and force Lien Yi to step into the sea of bitterness. The invisible boulder that came crashing down collided with the abyssal titan's fist. Qin Yu's body shook, and he coughed out a mouthful of blood. At this time, as blood splashed out from his mouth, he spat out a few words, light and darkness domain. Bang! Half was light, and the other half was darkness. A cage suddenly appeared. The one imprisoned was the invisible boulder that Lien Yi had thrown at him. This was the Saint Tao that Lien he had forcefully borrowed from not entering the sea of bitterness. It was intimately connected to him. Imprisoning the might of the divine path was equivalent to imprisoning Lieni. Qinyu stepped forwards and stepped into the light and darkness domain. He stood on the dividing line between black and white and sat down cross-legged. In the next moment, light and darkness were like a vortex in the deep sea. With loud, rumbling sounds, they began to rapidly spin. Light poured into darkness, and darkness flowed into light. As the two sides circulated and changed, a terrifying, refining strength was released that covered the invisible boulder. Borrowing the strength of light and darkness to summon a domain to descend, taking the path of destruction contained within the light and darkness to refine the Saint Tao's might. Lian Yi's heart shook and his eyes became extremely gloomy. At the same time, a trace of panic rose in his heart, causing his expression to change again and again. As mentioned before, the borrowed Saint Tao's might was closely related to Lian Yi. If he was injured, he would not be able to escape the consequences. Moreover, what was even more terrifying was that Lian Yi was shocked to discover that the refining power released by the light and darkness domain could actually destroy the Saint Tao's might. What kind of power was this? Qinyu, with a roar that was mixed with anger and resentment. Lian Yi stared at Qinyu, who was sitting cross-legged in the domain. He had not entered the sea of bitterness yet. If the borrowed Saint Tao's might was destroyed, he would definitely suffer a backlash from the heavens and earth. To put it more bluntly, if the Saint Tao's might was trapped, his future would be cut off. The unhindered Saint Tao would instantly become the destruction of his great Tao. From now on, he would have no hope of reaching the Saint Tao. For cultivators, the destruction of their great Tao was even worse than killing their wife and children. It was an absolute blood feud that would not end until death. Lian Yi was sure that Qinyu wanted to destroy his cultivation and destroy his great Tao. Of course, he was filled with anger and resentment. However, he did not realize that he was the one who wanted to kill Qinyu first and forced him to do so. That was why things had progressed to this point. Within the light and darkness domain, Qinyu opened his eyes. They were cold and indifferent. Senior brother Lian Yi, if you are afraid, you only need to admit defeat, and I will stop. Looking down from above. This tone, this gaze, it was exactly the same attitude that Lian Yi had when he was facing Qinyu. It was the same as slapping him in the face. Lian Yi's eyes were red. Qinyu, this was the second time he roared. His voice was trembling. The extremely domineering and arrogant Lian Yi had never thought that he would fall to such a state one day. Now, he looked at Qinyu with a gaze that was close to madness. His resentment and killing intent had almost condensed to the point of no return. Ruthlessness surged in his chest and wantonly bit at his heart, causing Lian Yi to be on the verge of going crazy. If he was really no match for Qinyu and was forced into a life-or-death situation, he would have no choice but to lower his head. The crux was that Lian Yi had an even stronger power. This was far from his limit. At the edge of the sea of bitterness, the divine path was unhindered. With just a thought, one could step into it and achieve the supreme divine path. At that time, he would be able to suppress Qinyu with a flip of his hand. He could even borrow the strike of becoming a saint to grind him to pieces. The more it was like this, the more unwilling refined one was. He clearly had the strength to kill Qinyu, yet he was being bullied and humiliated like this. His eyes became redder and redder, and his breathing became heavier. He clenched his fists so tightly that his nails pierced into his flesh, and he bit the corner of his mouth until blood trickled down. But Lian Yi didn't go mad after all. He was strong. He was proud. He was unwilling. He hated Qinyu to the bone. But none of this could compare to a bright future. As mentioned before, Refine, he had a great dream, and the foundation of achieving this dream was to cross the sea of bitterness and reach the shore, to achieve the great Tao of true divine. The reason why he had resisted the temptation of entering the divine path and did not enter the sea of bitterness was because he wanted to make up for the flaws in his body and enter the sea of bitterness with a perfect posture. He wanted to establish a foundation for the great Tao of the true divine. Now, Refined One was not far from this step. If he entered the sea of sufferings hastily, it would be equivalent to giving up everything. Qin Yu had to die, but he didn't have to die today. Once he reached the divine path in the future, killing him would be easy. His eyes were still blood red, but Refined One had already made a decision in his heart. So what if he lost all face? So what if he was laughed at by others? The heavens were high and the waters were far away. Let's see who will have the last laugh. He deeply looked at Qin Yu. Refined One never imagined that he would become this boy's stepping stone today, helping him become famous under the heavens. Sensing Refined One's eyes, Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. He suddenly felt a sense of helplessness, as if he had underestimated all the heroes of the world. He never imagined that in today's situation, especially in front of Peach Girl, the arrogant, insolent, and tough Refined One would actually abandon his face and dignity and beg for mercy. This was beyond Qin Yu's expectations. It also placed him in a dilemma. Once Refined One admitted defeat, could he still continue to kill him? Disregarding West Mountain Scholartree Sage's revenge, there was a high chance that Dragon Sage wouldn't watch helplessly as Refined One admitted defeat and was killed, even if the West Mountain and EC didn't have a harmonious relationship. But if he didn't kill Refined One today, then with his character, methods, and potential, he would surely become a great calamity in the future. He was in a dilemma. As if sensing the change in Qin Yu's mood, Refined One's lips twitched. Just as he was about to admit defeat, his complexion suddenly changed. Behind the crystal wall, Dragon Sage turned around. His eyes locked onto a common-looking middle-aged cultivator in a corner of the hall. This person looked up and met Dragon Sage's eyes. The corners of his lips curled up in a smile. "Brother Dragon, it's been a long time." As this voice sounded out in his ears, a towering scholartree suddenly appeared, instantly filling Dragon Sage's eyes. He cursed inwardly, but before he could make a sound, he was pulled into the world of scholartree. Although both of them were avatars, one had done this deliberately and the other had been caught off guard. It was hard for them to escape the fate of being tricked. Besides Qin Yu, no one else noticed that two true saint-level powerhouses were fighting in the main hall. After hearing the old turtle's reminder, Refined One's heart shook. But on the other side, he revealed an icy cold smile. "Junior Apprentice Brother Qin, I really must thank you. You forced me into such a distress situation that I was able to perceive the final hurdle." He lifted a hand and pointed between his eyebrows. "If Junior Apprentice Brother can block this strike, then I will consider it my loss." Kacha! With a light sound, all the seals within Refined One's body were undone. Without hesitation, he stepped into the sea of bitterness. Bang! A boundless aura burst out from his body. It was vast and dignified, like a prison that covered the entire hall. At this moment, everyone's eyes widened. Their faces were filled with shock and disbelief. This is entering the sea of bitterness, becoming a saint. Refined One. He had become a saint. The impact of this matter was far more shocking than anything that had happened before. As the disciples of a saint, everything they had experienced and seen told them without mercy that there were trillions of lives in this world. If one didn't become a saint, they were nothing but ants. Even if one's cultivation could shake the heavens and move the sun and moon, they still couldn't withstand the corrosion of time. In the end, they could only return to dust and enter the cycle of samsara. Everything else was fabricated. Only the Saint Tao existed forever. But because of this, they were even more aware of just how difficult it was to step into the sea of bitterness and become a saint. Not only did one need outstanding talent and a firm heart to cultivate, but they also needed enough luck. Any single flaw was destined to become nothing. And now, Refined One had become a saint. Before, no matter how strong he was, no matter how awe-inspiring he was still the benchmark and goal that everyone could silently set in their hearts. They secretly thought that one day in the future, perhaps they would also be able to reach the same level as him, or even surpass the strength he possessed. But now this thought had completely disappeared. No matter how extraordinary one was after becoming a saint, they had truly leapt into the skies and become an existence that stood above the clouds of the highest heavens. In the endless world of the vast sun, they even had the qualifications to participate in the game of chess. How could such a refined one still have the heart to chase after him? At this moment, standing on his opposite side, what would Chinyu, who had just humiliated refined one, feel? What sort of fate would he end up in? Chapter 1228. Chinyu was very vexed. He had changed his mind and stepped into the bitter sea. His goal had been achieved. This should have been something to be happy about. But when he thought of the two true divine auras that suddenly appeared and disappeared in the hall, he couldn't help but sigh at the impermanence of the world. Also, bringing his father along when he went out was simply shameless. How simple was this? Just a moment ago, Lien One had been filled with anger, resentment, and unwillingness to admit defeat. But in the blink of an eye, his expression had changed completely. If someone said that this had nothing to do with the true sage who had suddenly attacked, you would never believe it. Using this as a basis to make a deduction, it was simple. True divine giants were not cabbages that could be found anywhere. The only person who could make Lien Yi step into the bitter sea without hesitation was West Mountain sage Scholatry, who was as famous as the Yardmaster. You didn't have time to think about why Scholatry Sage had suddenly intervened and even stopped him at the risk of angering Dragon Sage. But his goal was clear. It was to buy a chance for Lien Yi to kill him with his divine cultivation. Therefore, Yu's distress only lasted for a very short period of time before he was covered by a cold, killing intent. The problem now was not whether Yu should kill Lien Yi or not, but that he, who had become a divine, believed that his strength had skyrocketed and he would not let Yu live. In other words, whether Yu killed him or not, Lien Yi would not let him go. What was there to hesitate about? Moreover, the moment he stepped into the bitter sea was also the moment when Lien Yi was at his weakest. If he missed this chance, even if Yu wanted to kill him, he wouldn't have another chance. Although Yu's strength had skyrocketed by mastering the light and darkness domain and condensing it, he was not arrogant enough to think that he could kill a divine. Therefore, if he wanted to attack, it was now. Dragon Sage was stalled by Scholatry Sage, and the two of them had escaped to another dimension to buy time for Lien Yi to kill Yu. But from another perspective, if Yu killed Lien Yi now, no one could stop him. As for whether or not Scholatry Sage would take revenge on him after killing Lien Yi, it was useless to think about it now. Then, he would kill him first. Deciphering this was very complicated, but in reality, in Yu's mind, he had already thought of everything. He looked up and locked his eyes on Lien Yi, who had stepped into the bitter sea and become a divine. There was no bitterness or fear in his eyes, only coldness and tenacity. Refining the might of the Saint Tao could indeed destroy refinement one's great Tao. But from the start, Yu's goal was to kill him. Thus, destroying his great Tao wasn't his true goal. Under the domain of light and darkness, the might of the divine path was damaged. However, at that time, refined one had not become a saint, so he could not clearly sense the borrowed might of the divine path. Thus, he could not detect that when it was damaged, the power of light and darkness had also entered it. Apart from that, there was also a surprise from the old tortoise. Originally, Yu was a bit hesitant to use the power of the old turtle. After all, nothing could be hidden from a true saint. If he were to be discovered, there would inevitably be a storm. Now that Sage Scholatry had interfered with the Dragon Sage, the two of them could escape together and erase this hidden danger. Yu no longer had any scruples in his heart. He simply forced the old turtle to help out and magnified the surprise several times over. If he didn't die, then there would be no justice in the world. Just as Yu was preparing his killing move to send Lien One home, Peach Girl suddenly stood up. Stop! She didn't pause at all. Her eyes blazed as she stared at Yu. Immediately admit defeat. The moment he stepped into the bitter sea, the divine path automatically condensed. Lien 1 tasted the soaring realm and felt the explosive power in his body. It was a little unstable because he had sealed himself and forcefully borrowed the might of the divine path. Fortunately, it wasn't a big problem. He only needed a very short period of time to suppress it. Of course, it wouldn't be so easy to completely solve it. However, he had plenty of time in the future to slowly erase the hidden danger left behind today. He would probably need a few more seconds to stabilize the power in his body. Although he was determined to kill Chinyu, it didn't stop him. Lien 1 hoped that he could experience an even greater degree of helplessness and despair. For example, he saw the hope of living, but in the next moment, he welcomed death. Of course, doing this would anger the yardmaster, but so what? He had already reached the divine path. Although he couldn't compare to a true saint, it wasn't difficult for him to preserve his life. Crossing the sea and reaching the other side was more about the difference in realm. Although the difference in strength was huge, it wasn't so huge that he couldn't resist it. The corner of Lien 1's mouth curled up, and he slowly said, "I naturally have to listen to Junior Apprentice Sister Peach Girl. Junior Apprentice Brother Chin, are you still not going to admit defeat?" Chin Yu sneered. "Senior Apprentice Brother Lien 1 really wants me to admit defeat and beg for mercy in front of you, giving me a glimmer of hope to live. Then I'll crush it with my own hands. Sorry, I'm not blind, and my brain is pretty good. I can only disappoint Senior Apprentice Brother." Peach Girl stepped forward. "Shut up. Lien 1, I admit defeat on behalf of Chinyu. Let him go." Her figure moved, and she was about to fly towards the light and darkness domain. However, just as she moved, Lien 1 flicked his sleeves and the void was instantly sealed, forcing her to retreat. "Junior Apprentice Sister Peach Girl, Chinyu is right. I have no intention of letting him live today. The more nervous you are, the more he wants to die." Lien 1's expression was cold. The divine Tao aura around him was like a tidal wave, sweeping out in all directions. "Junior Apprentice Brother Chinyu, you only have a nimble tongue. As a cultivator, strength is always the most important thing. In your next life, I hope that you can remember this." He raised his hand and pressed forward. The light and darkness domain instantly distorted and countless cracks appeared. Blood spurted out from Chin Yu's mouth and nose, and his eyes were solemn. This was the first time he had truly faced a divine Tao attack head-on. Although he had just entered the bitter sea, there was no doubt that it was powerful. It was far more powerful than Chin Yu had imagined. However, the power of the light and darkness domain was not that weak. Chin Yu's current miserable appearance was 70% due to the terrifying might of the divine Tao, and the rest was a deliberate act. Only by showing weakness could he kill the enemy with a single strike. Now is the time. Boom! The light and darkness domain suddenly exploded. Lien 1's expression changed slightly. This was because countless black and white spots of light appeared around his body. They flickered, and their auras were connected to each other, forming an incomparably powerful seal. However, the so-called powerful was only a relative term. For a divine Tao, it could be broken with a wave of a hand. Insignificant tricks. Lien 1's tone was cold. However, at this moment, his expression suddenly changed. The black and white spots of light condensed around his body did not need to be dispelled at all. They collapsed on their own. The sealing power that enveloped Lien 1 disappeared. However, in a short period of time that the sealing power appeared and disappeared, some changes occurred in his body. As if triggered by a medium, the backlash of the world that was just suppressed suddenly erupted. It was like a spark that fell into a withered grassland. In the blink of an eye, it became a prairie fire that burned fiercely, as if it was going to burn him into ashes. After stepping into the bitter sea, Lien 1's divine Tao that had just condensed shook violently under the backlash of the world. His surging power went out of control. Pa! Pa! On the surface of his body, his flesh and blood ruptured. His wounds were like spider webs, densely spreading all over his body. Fresh blood gushed out and instantly dyed his entire body. It was hideous, terrifying, and extremely miserable. Staring at Chin Yu, Lien Wan's eyes were filled with murderous intent. He had already stepped into the bitter sea and achieved the divine Tao. He had stepped into the peak of the world, but he was still forced into such a pathetic state. Damn it, how many more tricks does Qin Yu have? The backlash of the world was indeed terrifying. However, Lien Wan had achieved the divine Tao, and the backlash could not kill him. However, not dying did not mean that there were no losses. His newly condensed great path was now damaged, and it would take a long time for him to recover. It was even possible that he would impact the Nirvana realm in the future and cause unknown effects. After achieving the divine Tao, he had wanted to play around with Qin Yu a little and then kill him to vent the hatred in his heart. Who knew that things would turn out like this? Not only did he not kill Qin Yu, but he had also been ruthlessly bitten. With his status as a divine Tao, he had already lost all face in this situation. Not to mention that he had injured his great path today, and there would be endless repercussions in the future. How could Lien Wan not hate such a Qin Yu to the bone? Die. Qin Yu must die. His heart was filled with hatred. He used all his strength to suppress the backlash in his body and stared at Qin Yu. Soon, he would recover. At that time, no matter the cost, he would use all his strength to tear Qin Yu into pieces. Qin Yu could clearly feel the cold and ruthless killing intent in Lien Wan's eyes. Being hated by a divine Tao, he should have felt fear. However, in Qin Yu's eyes, there was only calmness, because he would not give Lien Wan another chance to attack. Taking a step forward, Qin Yu roared, "Senior brother Lien Wan, your thing? I will return it to you." Boom, he punched out. The space shook violently. The augmented divine Tao's might was blasted towards Lien Wan. The thing he had borrowed was naturally something that belonged to him. The moment it approached, there was no delay. This divine Tao's might directly fused into Lien Wan's body. His eyes widened, revealing a look of shock and anger. However, he was restrained by the backlash of the world and could not resist at all. Like a drop of ink falling into clear water, it spread out and dyed a large area with ink. This was almost the true portrayal of what was happening in Lien Wan's body. The divine Tao's might that entered his body instantly spread out and fused with his own strength. Then, to his horror, he discovered that the strength that was originally used to suppress the backlash of the world had suddenly become fuel for combustion. It was like pouring a basin full of kerosene on a pile of burning hay. The only result was, bang, the flames soared to the sky. Lien Wan howled in pain. The wounds on his body cracked open and large black spots suddenly appeared, as if they were caused by the burning flames. Blood gushed out like boiling water, rapidly evaporating in the air. In the blink of an eye, his mouth and nose were filled with the thick smell of blood. His entire body had been ignited. Qin Yu! Qin Yu! Lien Wan howled mournfully. Just a moment ago, he was still thinking of using the cruelest method to kill him. However, he did not expect that he would be the one dying in the blink of an eye. He did not know what had happened to all the divine Tao's might, but it had already been assimilated by the backlash of the world. All the strength that he possessed would instead become a sharp sword that would kill him. The entire process was irreversible. Unless his father was here, he might be able to save his life with the might of a true saint of the Permethar realm. But now, Sage Locust was entangled with the Dragon Sage and was not here at all. How could this be? How could this be? He was Shishan Lien Wan, the youngest son that Sage Locust doted on the most. He had lofty ideals and the ambition that matched them. He had made a very, very long plan for his future. However, just as he stepped into the bitter sea and achieved the divine Tao, he was about to soar into the sky and truly begin the first step of his plan. He was actually going to die. Ridiculous. This was really ridiculous. Lien Wan suddenly felt that he was really very sad. He had made countless preparations and cultivated hard for so many years, but in the end, it was all ruined by a boy who popped out of nowhere. What was even more sad was that even until the moment before his death, he did not truly place this boy in his eyes. The flames in his body became increasingly fierce. Lien, one could clearly feel that his life was about to be burned away. But how could he die like this? Death could not be changed. Then, the only thing he could do now was to drag Chinyu down with him. Chapter 1229. The old turtle had always felt that Chinyu was too violent. He liked to use force in everything he did. He didn't enjoy life and only knew how to fight and kill all day long. It was too boring. With such a master, sooner or later, he would lose control and end up in a miserable state. Why do you think that is? Hey, it's so simple. Do you know who I am? People call me the shadow of betrayal from the will of the abyss. Even if I'm just a shadow, I'm still alive and kicking to this day. I know so many things and can even guide Chinyu in his cultivation. Even an idiot should know that I'm not so simple, right? Chinyu was stuck with someone even smarter than a monkey. Did he not realize this? That was impossible. He clearly knew everything, but he still chose to take the risk out of desperation. If, of course, I'm just saying if my existence is discovered, let alone a saint, even a ruler will take action. What would happen to Chinyu then? Sigh, young people are so impulsive. They don't understand the importance of forbearance. As long as they can live, that is the greatest joy. Why care about anything else? To put oneself in danger to kill such a little thing. How unwise was that? The more he thought about it, the more he sighed. Chinyu was simply too impulsive, too reckless, too delicious. Truly, at this moment, the old turtle was dumbfounded. What kind of person would sit at home, yawn at the sky, and then have a piece of deep-fried pancake fall in his mouth with a pop? It was just right, without any deviation. And it really was a fried cake, absolutely a fried cake. It was the kind that sizzled with oil, crispy and refreshing. There was simply no one else like it. After a moment of daze, a very brief moment, the old turtle used his hands and feet to hug the fried cake tightly. There was no need to say anything. This was a feast that was delivered to his doorstep. If he didn't eat it, would he be struck by lightning? As for his dissatisfaction and complaints towards Chinyu, cough cough, this was the only good thing about this kid. He never lacked food and drink when he was by his side. All right, I'm going to start. You guys change your point of view first. Smelt 1 was sullen, angry, and in despair. He had become a saint, a powerful existence that stood at the top of the vast Yang world. But why did he repeatedly suffer losses in front of Chinyu? In the end, she wanted to drag him down with her before she died, but she didn't expect that she would take the initiative to offer herself to him. Lien did not know what was the thing that was imprisoning his soul and eating heartily. However, there was no doubt that it was terrifying. With such a simple entanglement and grab, he, a dignified soul of the divine path, had lost the ability to resist and could only allow himself to be slaughtered. Moreover, it was far too fast. It was so fast that when his soul broke into Chinyu's body, he didn't even have time to release his ultimate move before he was knocked to the ground. Breed 1 was suddenly enlightened. No wonder Chinyu was so strong. So he was hiding such an astonishing secret on his body. If this secret were to be exposed, he would surely die a miserable death. Of course, Lien, he was very clear about the principle that possessing a jade ring would cause one to get into trouble. But what made him even angrier was that he had clearly obtained Chinyu's life gate, but he didn't have a chance to make it explode. I really can't accept this. However, no matter what, my father will definitely take revenge for him. Chinyu, I will go first and wait for you in hell. Bang! Lien Yi's body loudly exploded. Blazing flames bloomed, wrapping around all the pieces of flesh and blood and turning them to ashes. If it weren't for the burnt smell in the air and the thin layer of dust on the ground, it would have seemed like all of this was an illusion. But in the end, this wasn't an illusion. The hall was deathly silent. Even the sound of breathing had disappeared. Countless eyes widened, filled with shock and horror. Lien Yi had died. The Lien Yi who had stepped into the sea of suffering and become a saint. He had died. Like this, he had died in front of everyone. Besides some ashes, he had been completely erased from the world, without a single trace left. This was madness. This must be madness. Saint Tao, Lien Yi had become a Saint Dao. They had actually witnessed with their own eyes a Saint Dao being directly obliterated. Although no one knew the specifics of what had happened, there was no doubt that Qin Yu had killed Lien Yi. He had actually slaughtered a Saint Dao. Gulp. It was unknown who gulped, but it was like a switch had been turned on. Then, the entire hall was filled with the same sound of gulping. In the incomparably quiet hall, it was truly a magnificent sight. In the vast Yang world, had there ever been a case where a person with a cultivation that hadn't stepped into the Saint Dao was able to kill a saint? There had to be. Otherwise, it would be impossible for such an arrogant and presumptuous phrase like slaughtering a saint to appear. But such a thing was far, far too rare. With everyone's status, there were only a handful of people who had done such a thing throughout history. But without exception, any cultivator who managed to slaughter a saint would become famous throughout the world and be remembered by countless cultivators. This wasn't just because they were strong, but also because the slaying of a saint was a moving treasure to the other cultivators of the world. Once one stepped into the sea of suffering and condensed a Saint Dao, they could form their own world. This world was recognized by the vast Yang world. Although it wasn't the same, it was similar to the abyssal demon kings that were recognized by the will of the abyss. If one killed a saint, no matter what the reason was, they would be marked by the vast Yang world. Any cultivator who killed a saint would obtain a reward from the vast Yang world. As for what this reward was, there was no definite answer. In the legends, it was said that it could help a cultivator step into the sea of suffering. Just this alone was enough to cause the world to go crazy. This matter had nothing to do with right or wrong. It was the respect that the world had for powerful life forms, and stepping into the sea of suffering was the threshold to obtaining this respect. Therefore, every saint slayer would face countless bloody massacres. Live, live, be killed. Some died in the end, and some survived. But whether they died or survived, the number of saint slayers could be counted on one hand. All of them erupted with a fierce strength that shocked the world, earning them an illustrious reputation. And this reputation was built upon the corpses of those cultivators who tried to kill the saint slayer, but were ultimately killed instead. As for the saint slayers that survived, without exception, they all transformed into peak existences within the vast Yang world. For instance, West Mountain's Sage Scholartree. It was rumored that before he reached the Great Tao, Sage Scholartree had met with a stroke of fate and killed an ancient true saint in a severely wounded state. He plundered his flesh and blood essence, allowing him to break through his limits and obtain his current achievements. Sage Scholartree used his status as a saint slayer to become a Permitha true saint. Now, after his son reached the Saint Dao, he was killed by Qin Yu on the spot. Who? Qin Yu gasped for breath. His complexion paled. Only by personally experiencing it did he understand just how flashy the words Saint Slayer were. But in order to accomplish this, it was an extremely dangerous matter. If it weren't for him grasping light and darkness as one, the old turtle helping him, and if it weren't for his mortal body and soul being sufficiently powerful, it would have been impossible for him to succeed. He was doomed to die. Everyone in the hall looked at him with shock, awe, horror, and even greed mixed in their depths. Qin, you could sense all of this, but he didn't have the mind to pay attention to it right now. His eyebrows furrowed together. His only thought was, what should he do next? Although he had lured Smelting One into saying in front of everyone that they wouldn't pursue the matter of life and death, would Sage Scholartree really abide by this? It likely wouldn't be so simple. If he did, would the dragon saint completely tear apart all pretense of cordiality with a true saint and protect him with all his strength? Disregarding all of this, in the current situation, placing his life or death in the hands of others was undoubtedly an extremely stupid matter. So, Qin Yu's first thought was to immediately leave the East Sea. After killing Smelting One, he didn't hesitate at all. He immediately thought about what to do next and made a decision. Qin Yu's reaction was extremely fast, but just as he was about to tell Peach Girl not to forget to take away the wooden box for him, the space within the hall suddenly shook. It wasn't true turbulence. Instead, it was a feeling of intense space distortions. Every single distortion was filled with an extremely terrifying feeling. Angry roars immediately echoed through the hall. Sage Scholatry, do you want to provoke a war with the East Sea? Lord Dragon Saint's anger soared to the heavens. Anyone could hear the flustered and exasperated tone in his voice. In order to become a true saint of the other shore, if one disregarded talent and lucky chances, just having a thick skin and a black heart wasn't enough. In terms of intelligence, this old dragon could toss an ordinary person 800 streets away. He certainly understood why Sage Scholatry had suddenly attacked him and dragged him into the battlefield. Damn it, you bastard, you bastard. He couldn't be more satisfied with that boy Chinyu. He had completely taken a liking to him. He didn't even hesitate to fall out with the yardmaster in order to keep him in the East Sea. If he was killed by Smelting One, then everything would be for naught. The East Sea would have two true saints and their beautiful dreams of dominating the world. Boy, don't die. You can't die. Shwa. Behind a crystal wall, a giant dragon's eyes flashed open. It swept over the hall and couldn't help but reveal a happy expression. He saw Chinyu. Although this boy was in a sorry state, his arms and legs were still intact. He was clearly far from death. Alive. He was actually still alive. Ha ha. Good, this is too good. Although Dragon Saint had prayed for Chinyu to be alive, he was well aware that the chances of this happening weren't high. Firstly, this was because of his understanding of Sage Scholatry. This old thing was famous for not acting unless he saw a rabbit. Since he had created a chance for Smelting One, he must have been confident in himself. Secondly, he had personally witnessed Smelting One's strength. Smelting One was already a saint without any hindrance. If he could take that crucial step into the sea of suffering, he could immediately become a saint. At that time, no matter how tyrannical that boy Chinyu was and how many cards he had in his hands, he still wouldn't have the ability to resist in front of a saint. That's right, that brat Chinyu. Just how did he survive? Also, the atmosphere in the hall was clearly not right. It was too quiet. The juniors in the hall were all looking at Chinyu. Their eyes were round and full of shock. Although they were shocked because they lacked knowledge, the juniors in the hall were destined to not be ordinary cultivators. They were more or less knowledgeable, and they wouldn't show such expressions. Something must have happened. Then, Dragon Saint realized that there was one person missing in the hall. Or was Smelting One? Why wasn't he here? Could it be that Chinyu had beaten him away? This was unlikely. Smelting One was a junior with no hindrance on the saint path. He could become a saint with a single thought. How could Chinyu have such a method? No. Dragon Saint's eyes widened. He could feel the aura in the hall that hadn't completely dissipated. The might of the saint path, it was Smelting One. He had indeed taken a step into the sea of suffering. However, this aura had already begun to dissipate. It had lost its foundation and had become rootless duckweed. Soon, it would completely disappear from the world. The only way to make the aura of a saint completely disappear from the world was to kill it. In other words, Smelting One had been killed. The moment this thought appeared, Dragon Saint suddenly looked at Chinyu. Sure enough, he found some unusual aura on him. The aura of a saint slayer. Even someone as strong-willed and valiant as Dragon Saint couldn't help but feel a little absent-minded as he looked at Chinyu. Although his understanding of Chinyu had been refreshed many times, and he was sure that this junior was one of the strongest cultivators with the greatest potential he had seen in many years, Chinyu's performance had still far exceeded his expectations. As a true saint of the Permitha continent, he naturally knew how strong the saint path was. He also understood that although it was easy to say slaying a saint, it was very difficult to do it. However, Chinyu had succeeded. This kid is really going to defy the heavens. Dragon Saint murmured in his heart, but his expression was extremely grave. Because Sage Scholatry was here. In other words, Chinyu had almost killed Smelting One, who had just become a saint, in front of his father. This was simply ridiculous. Dragon Saint was very clear that Smelting One's death was not Chinyu's fault. Smelting One had only himself to blame. But even so, would Sage Scholatry think so? With this black-hearted and merciless old locust tree style of doing things, the chances of him letting Yu go were nearly negligible. Moreover, according to what Dragon Saint knew, this junior smelting one had won the favor of the old locust tree. There seemed to be some other hidden story behind this. Bang! A terrifying aura instantly arrived, covering the entire hall and covering everyone within. It was like a towering mountain pressing down on them, making it hard for them to even breathe. "You were the one who killed my son?" An ordinary-looking middle-aged cultivator frowned as he stared at Yu. There was a bit of confusion in his eyes, but there was also a cold light. Peach Girl's figure flickered. She stood in front of Yu and bowed. "Greetings, Sage Scholatry. Today's battle was provoked by Smelting One. Moreover, he and junior apprentice brother you have already stated that life or death is up to fate and that neither side will pursue the other. I asked that Sage Scholatry investigate this matter. In fact, everyone knew that Sage Scholatry had been in the hall from start to finish, so there was no need to investigate this matter. But Peach Girl still had to say these words. The Saint Path cared about face, and this was especially true for a true saint of the Permethau continent. Regardless of what would happen in the future, she had to use her words to pressure Sage Scholatry and save Yu's life first. But the development of events was clearly outside of her expectations. Sage Scholatry glanced at her. His eyes were cold and indifferent, causing her heart to shrink. Roar! With a deep dragon roar, a figure walked out from the crystal wall. This figure was tall and burly and wore golden dragon robes. His every movement and action was filled with arrogance and disdain. "Sage Scholatry, this is the East Sea, not your western mountains." Dragon Saint's eyes were cold and callous. A terrifying aura shook around him. Sage Scholatry had no expression. "You want to protect him?" Dragon Saint lightly said, "Yes." Sage Scholatry glanced at him. He suddenly said, "Your main body is too far away from the East Sea." Dragon Saint's complexion changed. "Peach Girl, hurry and take Yu away." He lifted a hand and pressed forwards. Space instantly locked down, imprisoning Sage Scholatry's aura. Sage Scholatry didn't resist. His eyes became even colder. "It's too late." The moment Sage Scholatry's voice fell, the middle-aged cultivator he was residing in disintegrated. In the next moment, above the vast and boundless East Sea, the skies were smashed apart. An ancient scholar tree appeared, its branches swaying in the wind. It was astonishingly large, and its canopy spread out, covering the entire skies. Today, Sage Scholatry's main body had arrived at the East Sea. The East Sea was a sea, but it was also a world. This world was the place where Dragon Saint achieved his Tao and was protected by his great Tao. Thus, when the Peach Garden opened the spatial gate, Peach Girl didn't directly descend. Instead, she went to Dragon Lady's dwelling first in order to express her respect towards Dragon Saint. At this time, Sage Scholatry's main body tore through space and arrived in the East Sea, instantly touching upon the aura of Dragon Saint's great Tao. A dragon roar echoed out, seeming to cross through space and time. Above the boundless and endless East Sea, the phantom of a great dragon appeared. This was a true great dragon. Its body was hidden in the clouds, faintly discernible, as if it were the Great Wall of China. Shua, the great dragon, opened its eyes, its gaze locking onto the ancient scholar tree that supported the heavens. Its deep and low voice contained a rhythm that seemed to touch the heavens and earth. What is Sage Scholatry's intention? As the great dragon's voice echoed out, the entire East Sea began to boil. Endless seawater shot into the skies, condensing into water dragons in midair. The water dragons shot into the heavens, their number incalculable. They twisted around the ancient scholar tree, connecting their heads and tails together, forming a water dragon seal. A face appeared on the ancient scholar tree's branches. Its eyes looked at the great dragon, and its lips moved. Its voice was like a clap of thunder, echoing throughout the East Sea. I have no intention of becoming enemies with Dragon Saint, but my son cannot die in vain. As a father, I must take revenge for him." The great dragon's voice became increasingly low. "Does sage scholarly insist on this?" The face on the ancient scholar tree closed its eyes. "Then I will have to offend you." Bang! The branches instantly erupted. The seal formed by the countless water dragons was shattered to pieces. Within the dragon palace, Peach Girl reached out and grabbed Chinyu. She took out a peach blossom and placed a finger on it. Hum! Space shook and faint ripples appeared. They seemed incomparably difficult, far from being as smooth as they were in Dark Bright World. Once, Chinyu had seen a wooden door woven from countless peach branches. Bit by bit, it was forcefully squeezed out from within. Without any hesitation, Peach Girl pulled Chinyu and reached out to push open the wooden door. But at this time, a repulsive force erupted from the door. Then, there was a pain scream, and the spatial fluctuations were smoothed out. The wooden door that was forcefully squeezed out shattered and was swallowed up by space. If it weren't for the fact that the two of them had been pushed open, they feared they would have suffered the same fate as the wooden door. Chinyu's complexion changed, and his eyes darkened. He discovered that the situation was far more serious than he had imagined. With Sage Scholarly's cultivation, even if this was the EC, he could sense everything. It was impossible for him not to know that Peach Girl was with him. But looking at his actions just now, he didn't have any scruples at all, as if killing Peach Girl was one of his goals to begin with. Within the hall, Dragon Saint paled. "You two, don't go out." He took a step forwards and instantly vanished. In terms of absolute strength, Sage Scholarly and the Garden Master both stood at the peak true saint level of the vast Yang world. Although Dragon Saint was tyrannical, his strength was slightly inferior. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been smashed by the Garden Master in the past because of a peach. Of course, the truth was that he had made a request to marry Peach Girl into the East Sea as his daughter-in-law, but the Garden Master had flatly rejected him. But no matter how it was said, Dragon Saint was weaker to begin with. Moreover, his main body wasn't here. Even if his avatar fused with the aura of the Great Tao, he still wouldn't be Sage Scholarly's match. Above the East Sea, the giant dragon with the aura of the Great Tao faced ancient Scholarly. It was beaten into a pitiful state. It roared again and again, but was helpless to do anything. This fellow's main body left everyone speechless. It was fine if he ran far away, but he had even fallen asleep and hadn't woken up even now. Sage Scholarly's voice was bone-chilling. "Dragon Saint, if you don't retreat, then don't blame me for being ruthless and destroying your aura of the Great Tao." Chapter 1230. Sage Scholarly, how majestic! Wind rose between heaven and earth and instantly blew across the East Sea. Sage Scholarly's dragon sage avatar, who was in a dilemma, suddenly relaxed. Then he gritted his teeth and roared inwardly. Look at his reaction speed, and then look at my own true sage. He's too immoral. He couldn't be an avatar anymore. The face that appeared on the towering ancient scholar tree opened its eyes again and looked at the other side of the sky. It frowned slightly and then became indifferent. Boom! The sky cracked, and countless peach branches came crashing down. In the blink of an eye, another peach tree covered the sky above the endless East Sea. The two true sages faced each other with equal harshness. Their auras entangled and confronted each other, instantly changing the color of the world. Above the East Sea, waves surged, stirring up endless water vapor that soared into the sky and condensed into clouds. The world suddenly darkened, and then a torrential rain poured down. Every drop of rain contained a trace of true sage aura. Thus, it was heavier than a mountain rock, and when it fell into the sea, there was a deafening roar. Sage Scholarly said calmly, "Lien Yi is linked to my Great Tao. Your ninth disciple killed him, harming my Great Tao. He deserves death." The Yardmaster's voice came from the peach tree. "Your son is dead. Do you want my son-in-law to be buried with him?" Long Sheng, who had retreated to the side and watched the two tigers fight, suddenly changed his expression. This peach seller was a bastard. How could he steal his lines? No, he had to wake up his main body and have him return to the EC. Otherwise, the son-in-law he had chosen would be gone. Thinking about it carefully, the yardmaster had rejected Peach Girl as the daughter-in-law of the EC. Now he wanted Qin Yu to be the son-in-law of the EC, but the yardmaster had interfered. Long Sheng was flustered and exasperated. He really wanted to roar, "Are you trying to go against my East Sea?" Of course, Peach Girl and Qin Yu were originally from the Peach Garden. Our Lord Long Sheng had selectively forgotten about this matter. Sage Scholatry's voice became calmer. "Must it be like this?" The yard master sneered. "Why do we have to pretend to be friends? Since both of us have ample reasons, let's fight." Boom! The peach branches that filled the sky instantly erupted and twisted together. In the blink of an eye, a giant that could support the heavens appeared, punching out. Sage Scholatry sighed softly, and ancient Scholatry also transformed into a giant. The two towering giants did not hesitate and instantly fought each other. The true divine had crossed the bitter sea and reached the other side of the great Tao. Every move he made contained the power of the great Tao. The two seemed to be fighting with their rough bodies, but every time they clashed, the entire East Sea would shake. Almost in an instant, countless sea creatures were crushed into powder. The Dragon Sage clone stomped his feet and cursed, "If the two of you want to fight, go out and fight. Since you destroyed my East Sea, this seat will not let you off." Sage Huai glanced at him. "Not harming the Eastern Sea is fine, but don't interfere in today's matter. Otherwise, you will be the enemy of my West Mountain." Bang! A fist shattered the sky, and Sage Scholatry stepped out. "You and I will go to the Realm Void to fight." The magnificent and imposing Dragon Palace was now dead silent. Everyone couldn't help but widen their eyes. Before the East Sea birthday banquet began, no one thought that because of a small wager, things would develop to this point. First, there was Leonie, who broke through and stepped into the bitter sea to become a half-sage. Then he was killed by Qin Yu. Then, two true sages descended one after another. Now, they had broken through the realm and were fighting in the void. A holy war. This was a true battle that involved two true sages. It didn't seem to cause too much of a stir, but the truth was that what happened today would cause a massive shock. It would even have a profound impact on the structure of the vast Yang world. Sovereigns were aloof from worldly affairs and rarely interfered in the affairs of the world. The Permitha True Saint was the highest level of strength in vast Yang. Peak existences of the Saint Path could only look up to sovereigns. They wouldn't easily fight with each other, but once they collided, victory and defeat would be determined. The victor would condense the great Tao, while the loser would suffer damage to their cultivation. The Yardmaster and Sage Scholatry stepping into the void meant that the relationship between the two holy lands had completely deteriorated. Peach Girl pulled on Qin Yu. Her figure flashed before the Dragon Girl. "Take us to the Dragon Palace's transmission array." The Dragon Girl quickly nodded. Her eyes darted around, not daring to look at Qin Yu. Who would have thought that this fellow would suddenly transform into a Saint Slayer? The Dragon Girl knew that as long as he didn't die, he would inevitably explode in the future. From how the Yardmaster didn't hesitate to tear apart all pretense of cordiality with Sage Scholatry, one could see how much she valued Qin Yu. In particular, the Yardmaster had just personally acknowledged Qin Yu's identity. With the protection of the Peach Garden, his chances of survival would be much higher. It was inevitable that she would feel sad. But the Dragon Girl knew that she had already been eliminated from the competition for the Peach Garden. Moreover, to be able to find such an outstanding man like Qin Yu was also a good result for the Peach Girl. With this thought in mind, she comforted herself. So, there was no need to say anything else. She had to think of a way to improve their relationship. Now was an opportunity. He had borrowed the Dragon Palace's transmission array to save his life. This was a favor, no matter how big or small, so she had to repay it. But before the Dragon Girl could move, the cultivators who followed refinement one suddenly surrounded her. Everyone in the hall was in an uproar. The dragon girl clenched her teeth, her face dark. How insolent! This is the East Sea, not a place where you can behave atrociously. You dare to disrespect me? Do you want to die? The Soul Hook lineage cultivators cupped their hands together. We are acting on orders. I asked Miss Dragon Girl to step back. The Dragon Girl coldly sneered. What if I don't step back? Just as she spoke, a strength gushed out from the void and imprisoned her, not giving her a chance to struggle. Space twisted and she vanished from everyone's sight. The Dragon Sage's deep voice sounded out. The EC will no longer interfere in today's matters. There was nothing he could do. He was only an avatar. Normally, he could hold the fort and scare these juniors, but facing the Yardmaster or Scholartree Sage, he was no different from delivering himself to death. That old locust tree on the West Mountain wasn't a good person and was also very cunning. But at least everyone knew one thing about him. This fellow never boasted. Whatever he said, he would do it 100% of the time. Even if he couldn't do it this time, he would find a way to make up for it. If the Dragon Sage avatar didn't retreat, he would really dare to drag the Yardmaster into a battle in the East Sea. The shockwaves from the battle between two true saints would be enough to plow through the entire East Sea several times over. Moreover, who knew whether or not this cold and ruthless old locust tree would secretly strike the seabed several times? The consequences of that would be unimaginable. Although the East Sea wouldn't be destroyed, most of the sea creatures under the Dragon Sage's command would die. This karma was too strong, and the expected consequences were too terrifying. The Dragon Sage avatar could only retreat. But he would definitely remember this debt on the West Mountain. Once his main body returned, he would go to the West Mountain and have a good talk. The Soul Reaper lineage cultivator cupped his hands together. Thank you for your understanding, Lord Dragon Sage. He stood up and locked his eyes on Chinyu. Kill him. Peach Maiden lifted a hand and pointed. The void shook. Peach branches drilled out, peach blossoms blooming on them. 10 miles of peach blossoms. The reason Smelt was able to forcefully break through was because he was strong enough. As for these people in front of him, they were far weaker than him. Peach Maiden didn't want to kill these people. She knew that the cultivators of the Soul Reaper lineage couldn't kill Chinyu. Everyone in the hall had witnessed Chinyu kill the Dragon Sage with their own eyes, so they didn't doubt this. But they still attacked. There was only one explanation. These people wanted to prevent Chinyu from leaving. Or, to be more precise, they wanted to delay for time. Smelt had died, but he wasn't the only powerhouse in the West Mountain. Thus, Peach Maiden's first attack was 10 miles of peach blossoms. She didn't want to kill the enemy. She only wanted to imprison them and bring Chinyu away from the Dragon Palace as quickly as possible. The Dragon Sage had announced that he wouldn't interfere anymore, so there was no need to mention using the Dragon Palace as a transmission array. Peach Maiden, leave Chinyu behind. That way you can protect yourself. With a cold shout, space instantly shattered and massive cracks spread out. Chapter 12:31. The reason why a holy land was revered as a holy land was that it had a saint presiding over it. But the reason why it could obtain the reverence and respect of the trillions of lives in the vast young world was because of its ability to train disciples. In everyone's impression, strong as rain and deep heritage were definitely in the top 3. Of course, there were always exceptions, but there were a few special cases that could be ignored. West Mountain 9 heads. The hall was filled with cries of alarm. Pupils shrank, and many people subconsciously drew back, their eyes filled with unconcealable fear. They couldn't be blamed for losing face. The person who appeared in front of them was far beyond their expectations and was far too terrifying. 9 heads was a disciple of the West Mountain and was active 1,000 years ago. It was rumored that his true form was an ancient demonic beast that swallowed lives to cultivate, creating endless sins of slaughter. Because he swallowed the bloodline of many saints, he aroused public anger. They joined forces to pressure the West Mountain to send down divine punishment. Afterwards, 9 heads disappeared without a trace. Many people thought that he had perished but they never imagined that he would still be alive. He had hidden himself for 1,000 years and disappeared from everyone's sight. No one would think that he had been sleeping for 1,000 years. What's more, none of them were blind. Although they couldn't feel the true aura of the 9 heads in front of them, they could feel the stifling feeling that made it difficult to even breathe. They could almost smell the thick scent of blood in the air. Thinking of the sins that 9 heads had committed and the fact that he had swallowed the descendants of many saints, how could the people in the hall not feel fear? Qin, you didn't know the name of West Mountain 9 heads, but the reactions of the people in the hall and Peach Girl's tense body indicated how strong this person was. Before, when Peach Girl summoned the Peach Branch and the portal was destroyed, Qin had already sensed that something was wrong. Now, this feeling was even clearer. Lien, he had come uninvited. Sage Scholatry had hidden himself, and then his true body had arrived. His attitude was unyielding, and he didn't hesitate to start a holy war with the Yardmaster. Now, a terrifyingly strong 9 heads had broken through space and arrived. No matter how he looked at it, this seemed like a plan that had been prepared long ago. If this was true, then today's matters were far more complex and dangerous than he had imagined. The reason was simple. Before Lieni died, he never imagined that after he stepped into the bitter sea and became a saint, he would be killed by Qinyu. Even if Sage Scholatry was a Permitha true saint, he wouldn't have been able to predict this. In other words, Qinyu was at most a random chess piece that messed up their plans. He wasn't the key to this game. Now, Xiao Chun was using killing Xiao Chun as an excuse to take revenge for Lieni. However, it was more likely that he was trying to continue his initial plan. West Mountain wanted to kill Qinyu, but Qinyu wasn't their most important target. If he hadn't spoken with Dragon Lady before, he might not have been able to confirm this. But now his eyes fell on Peach Lady's back. He took a deep breath and said, "Senior apprentice sister, I can deal with this by myself. You go first." Peach Girl shook her head. "Senior sister," Peach Girl replied, "I'm the one who implicated you." Her tone was indifferent. "If there's an opportunity later, you can escape by yourself." 9 heads raised his hand and punched out. It was as if a huge rock had smashed into the surface of a lake, instantly stirring up 1,000 layers of waves. The peach blossoms in the void were suddenly scattered by the wind and rain. Before the 10 peach blossoms could form, they were forcefully dispersed. Everyone held their breaths. Although they expected that 9 heads, who hadn't appeared in 1,000 years, would be extremely powerful now, the degree of his strength still far surpassed their imaginations. Lieni had just broken through the 10 peach forest, and it wasn't as easy as it seemed. Didn't this mean that 9 heads was even stronger than Lieni? 9 heads grinned. "Since junior apprentice sister Peach Girl isn't willing, then I'll have to offend you." He lifted a hand and grasped forwards. From a void behind him, there was a sudden roar. The phantom of a fierce monster appeared. It was shaped like a giant snake, but had 9 heads. 18 pairs of withered yellow eyes filled with a desolate and deathly stillness locked onto Qinyu. "Kacha! Kacha!" It was like flowing water freezing at a low temperature. This was because the strength that descended at this moment was to imprison the soul. Qinyu's eyebrows arched up. Could it be that the cultivators of the West Mountain focused more on soul cultivation? This was the case when Lien Yi wanted to drag him down with him, and now 9 heads wanted to kill him. It was likely that he had come to feed him on his own initiative. Feeling the old turtle stirring, Qinyu hesitated. Although the 2 true sages had entered the Void Realm to fight, the Dragon Sage avatar was still here. If they were discovered and the Dragon Sage took advantage of the situation to attack him, then that would be a big joke. Qinyu was able to kill Lien Yi because he was strong enough. But he couldn't ignore the fact that he had just made a breakthrough and suffered a backlash from the world, giving Qinyu a chance to take advantage of him. Otherwise, who knew what the final outcome would be? If he really had to face the Dragon Sage avatar head-on, even if he had achieved the light and darkness fusion state, he still didn't have the slightest confidence. But as things progressed, Qinyu didn't need to worry anymore. This was because someone else had arrived. 9 heads arched up his eyebrows. The 9 heads of the evil beast phantom behind him bit forwards at the same time. It was clearly just a phantom, but it had the ability to interfere with reality. Space suddenly shattered. A figure walked out. At first glance, the impression he gave off was that he was tall and strong. It was unknown whether it was because he had a special hobby or because he naturally liked to be clean, but he was wearing a pure white long robe without a single speck of color. As for this long gown, it could be said that it was slim-fitting, so it was filled to the brim with his tall and strong body. The word curvaceous was definitely not appropriate to describe a man, but it was very appropriate to describe this person. 9 heads. Are you itching for a beating again? How dare you touch my junior sister Peach Blossom? His voice was too warm. Even in this kind of situation, the words he spoke were soft. One couldn't feel the slightest bit of strength. But his voice wasn't important. This was because he was currently walking in the horrifying turbulence formed by the 9-headed evil beast tearing space apart. Yet, he seemed to feel nothing, not to mention a wound. Even the white robe on his body didn't move in the slightest. It was as if there was an invisible force field covering his entire body. Nothing from the outside world could invade him. Chin, you had already discovered that the Peach Garden Master and the senior apprentice brothers and sisters were all very different. But at this moment, he couldn't help but widen his eyes. He wondered which senior apprentice brother or second senior apprentice brother this was. He soon found his answer. Peach Blossom bowed. Greetings, elder senior apprentice brother. This was the elder senior apprentice brother who loved to go into seclusion and reason with others. He was also White Phoenix's idol. In terms of his tall and sturdy body, he truly lived up to his reputation. As all sorts of thoughts raced through his mind, Chin Yu cupped his hands together. Chin Yu greets elder senior apprentice brother. The elder senior apprentice brother nodded towards Peach Blossom. His eyes fell on him. Hello, junior brother. I have been in seclusion this entire time, and it is only now that we meet. I apologize for my lack of manners. Chin Yu said, Elder senior apprentice brother, cultivating in seclusion is the most important thing. The elder senior apprentice brother nodded with satisfaction. For you to say such words is excellent. As cultivators, the only thing we should do is cultivate and cultivate. The passing of time cannot be recovered. So how can we disappoint it? Junior brother, you must remember this and not slack off in the future. What the elder senior apprentice brother said was correct and also in line with his status as the elder senior apprentice brother. But Chin Yu still couldn't help but feel a bit strange in his heart. He thought that the West Mountains and Peach Blossom Garden were about to engage in an all-out battle. So why was the elder senior apprentice brother nagging at him like this? It wasn't just Chin Yu. In the main hall, this was the first time many people were seeing this extraordinary elder senior apprentice brother of Peach Blossom Garden. This white robe, this tall and sturdy, this curvaceous body, it was indeed extraordinary. But their complexions still stiffened. They thought to themselves, why did the earth-shattering momentum suddenly slow down the moment this person arrived? Was this the elder senior apprentice brother of Peach Blossom Garden's way of doing things? Chin Yu coughed and earnestly bowed. Thank you for the pointers, elder senior apprentice brother. I will remember it. The elder senior apprentice brother was clearly satisfied with his attitude. He nodded and was about to say a few more words about his own experiences in cultivation when he was interrupted. Gao Zhuang, are you done yet? Puff! Chin Yu spat out a mouthful of blood. He swore that if it weren't for his shrewdness, he would have laughed out loud on the spot. This name, it was quite appropriate. The elder senior apprentice brother furrowed his eyebrows, his expression solemn. 9-headed, I am educating my junior apprentice brother. I am very unhappy that you interrupted me. His voice was still warm, so warm that it didn't have any killing intent. But as he spoke these words, there was finally a hint of a domineering feeling to them. Chin Yu thought that this was right. This was the demeanor that the elder senior apprentice brother of Peach Blossom Garden should have. Unless you immediately thank me right now, otherwise I will hit you. Just as this thought appeared in his mind, it immediately vanished into thin air. Damn it, what the hell was with this cute and adorable déjà vu? Moreover, It had to be matched with your voice and physique. It was really hard to accept. Nine-Headed was clearly having a hard time holding himself back. So after the elder senior apprentice brother finished speaking, he directly attacked. In the past, West Mountain and Peach Blossom Garden had fought several times, both big and small. He could be considered acquaintances with Gao Zhuang, and he knew that if he continued to wrangle with him, Gao Zhuang could talk to him for an entire day. Of course, there was another point, and that was that Nine-Headed had long wanted to beat him up. Not only did he want to now, but he also wanted to do so in the past. It was a pity that his skills were not as good as his. It was true that he had hammered him a few times, but he had been hammered even more miserably. But today was different. After 1,000 years of seclusion, Nine Heads had made up his mind to spread his name throughout Vast Yon. Gao Zhuang was clearly an excellent stepping stone. Of course, if he could eat him, that would be even better. To be honest, Nine-Headed's own origins were ancient and mysterious enough, but he could feel that Gao Zhuang was even more ancient and mysterious than he was. Even Sage Huai could not completely figure it out. However, there was one thing that was without a doubt. If he ate Gao Zhuang, he would definitely reap great rewards. He might even transform into a perfect being in one fell swoop. Eldest senior brother nodded calmly. Little junior brother, leave with junior sister first. Leave this to me. Then he turned around and punched out. Qin Yu's eyebrows jumped up and his heart violently shrank. All of the ridicule he felt towards his eldest senior apprentice brother was instantly cleared away. Your eldest senior brother is indeed your eldest senior brother. Regardless of how he looks, his strength is top-notch and valiant. In terms of his physical body, he had the Abyssal Titan true body. To be honest, he was extremely confident. However, Qin Yu would not be able to withstand this punch unless he used the light and darkness domain. Or, it would be more accurate to say that even if he used the light and darkness domain, it was unknown what the consequences would be. He was truly strong. Like a star falling into the sea, endless tsunamis instantly stirred up. They rumbled in all directions, wrapping up everything within. Even if he wasn't within, he could clearly feel the terrifying strength surging within, as well as the destructive aura that filled the space. This punch struck Nine-Headed, but it also covered all the cultivators of the Soul Reaper lineage. A good tongue is inferior to a hard fist. And our eldest senior apprentice brother not only knows how to speak, but his fists are even harder. Peach Girl grabbed onto Qin Yu. Let's go. Feeling the resistance behind her, she frowned and turned her head. Qin Yu said, Senior apprentice sister, wait. Bang! There was a loud explosion like a thunderclap. The entire Dragon Palace's main hall shook. If it weren't for it being immersed in the aura of the dragon saint all year round, it feared it would have turned into ruins. Nine-Headed clenched his fists and crossed them in front of him. His body was forcefully pushed back like a boulder, and his feet dug deep grooves in the ground. He licked the corners of his lips, a burning heat in his eyes. He stared at his eldest senior apprentice brother like a hungry wolf staring at a delicious roast chicken. The West Mountain Nine-Headed had used his performance to prove just how strong he was. But the people around him didn't have this kind of strength. Of course, the reason for this was because Nine-Headed only protected himself. He simply didn't care about these cultivators that were attached to the West Mountain. The Soul Reaper lineage cultivator took the lead. 11 people spat out blood from their noses and mouths as they were sent flying far away. Their eyes were wide with shock and horror. Each one of them could be called a genius. Although they knew they weren't the strongest, they never imagined that there would be such an astonishing disparity between them and a true top genius. One punch, it was just one punch. Perhaps the Peach Garden's eldest senior apprentice brother wasn't far from perfection. Chapter 1232. Shua, a black shadow flashed in front of him. The Soul Hook lineage cultivator was startled. But before he could respond, his neck was grabbed. Qin Yu stretched out his other hand. Give me the wooden box. Of course, this wasn't a request. The Soul Hook lineage cultivator looked into his eyes. He hesitated for less than a second before surrendering. He had already killed one. Was there any difference in killing another? Chinyu took the wooden box and smirked. He leaned close to the cultivator's ear. You are the third. Kacha! With a light sound, the cultivator's neck was bent at a strange angle. At the same time, the power of light and darkness blasted into him, tearing his soul to pieces. Chinyu tossed away the corpse. He turned and grabbed Peach Girl. Senior apprentice sister, let's go. Shwa, shwa. The two of them were extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, they rushed out of the main hall, and in the blink of an eye, they had already disappeared among the astonishing buildings of the Dragon Palace. Some people's eyes flashed, but in the end, they remained silent. Not to mention the arrival of the Garden Master. Just their eldest senior apprentice brother alone was enough to deter them. Rumble, rumble. Even without looking back, they could still clearly feel the loud sounds coming from behind them and the terrifying strength contained in the shaking seawater. Their eldest senior apprentice brother was fiercely fighting with 9 heads. Qinyu's eyes flashed. The Garden Master had arrived in the East Sea, and their eldest senior apprentice brother, who had always been in seclusion, was also here. It seemed as if the Peach Garden had already sensed the malice of the West Mountains. If this was true, then the degree of danger they were in shouldn't be too high. After all, with how much the Garden Master loved Peach Girl, she definitely wouldn't allow her to be injured. Thinking of this, Chinyu let out a light breath. Peach Girl's indifferent voice sounded out. Chinyu, let's separate here. Go by yourself. Chinyu frowned. Peach Girl said, Sage Scholatry won't easily take action. She didn't need to explain any further. Just a few words were enough. Chinyu bitterly smiled. He must have lost his mind to need Peach Girl's reminder. Could it be that he had used too much strength just now and his brain was lacking oxygen? This was a battle between true saints. Sage Scholatry didn't hesitate to do so. How could he let the two of them escape so easily? Although their eldest senior apprentice brother had blocked Lien, Yi, and the others, who knew how many other methods were hidden outside the Dragon Palace. Peach Girl wanted to separate because she knew that she was the real target. Chinyu would be in greater danger if he stayed with her. If the two of them separated, Chinyu's chances of survival would be higher. Moreover, he would also be separated from the forces that would pursue them later. That's all. Without giving Chinyu a chance to explain or refute, Peach Girl let go of him and flew off in another direction. This woman is really decisive. But I'm a saint now. Don't tell me I'm not trustworthy. Unless Peach Girl thought that the person who was going to hunt her down would be stronger than Rini, who had become a saint. Saint slayers were few and far between, and most of them had some unknown secrets, such as being in a state of being heavily injured or taking advantage of the situation. Chinyu killing Lien Yi was an example. In reality, the power of the divine path was far beyond imagination, and the only one who could be more powerful than the divine path was usually another divine path. Chinyu frowned. His instincts told him that leaving by himself was indeed the best choice he could make. After a moment of silence, he took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. A bitter smile appeared on his face. Sometimes, people were just so contradictory. They knew that it was dangerous and they shouldn't do it, but they could only choose to take the risk. But this was probably the reason why people were human. There were always times when you didn't want to go, but you had to. Strictly speaking, Peach Girl realized that something was wrong even before Chinyu did. This was because Sage Scholatry had arrived. In truth, the Dragon Sage wasn't wrong about one point. Peach Girl did possess the Tao accumulations of the Garden Master. It was the existence of these Tao accumulations that allowed her to sense Sage Scholatry's malice from the very start. She didn't know why Sage Scholatry wanted to kill her, but since she was certain of this, she could no longer be together with Chinyu. This decision had come from her instincts. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, Peach Girl had overlooked the fact that Chinyu was a saint slayer and possessed formidable strength. Why did she do this? Peach Girl couldn't figure it out. She just didn't want to see Chinyu fall into danger. What a strange feeling. Peach Girl took a deep breath and then exhaled, suppressing her chaotic thoughts. Her expression became indifferent once more. She flipped her hand, and a wooden box appeared in her palm. The box opened on its own, revealing 3 peach blossom petals. She took out one of the petals and blew at it. With a cracking sound, it shattered, and a phantom appeared, rapidly becoming more solid and clear. It was surprisingly another peach girl. Like a mirror, she was clearly reflected in it. Not only were the 2 peach girls identical in appearance, but their auras weren't any different either. They glanced at each other. The peach girl formed from the peach blossom didn't hesitate at all. She turned and continued forwards. Peach girl put away the wooden box and sank down into the sea. Only when she was 10,000 feet deep did she stop. She lifted a hand and took out a lamp. The lamp was originally extinguished, but the moment she took it out, it ignited on its own, releasing a blue light. Quietly, the surrounding seawater was pushed aside. In the blink of an eye, a blank space was formed 10,000 feet beneath the sea. Beneath the illumination of a lamp, this space seemed truly blank, as if it had been separated from the East Sea and couldn't be sensed by the outside world. Here, Peach Girl took out another wooden box. She crushed a second peach blossom and carved out a second peach girl. She glanced at Peach Girl and then sat down cross-legged. Whoosh, the seawater broke apart. Peach Girl flew into the skies, howling towards the horizon and disappearing without a trace. Chinyu stopped. He discovered that he had underestimated Peach Girl's methods. Right now, there were 2 Peach Girls flying off in different directions. Their auras were exactly the same, and he couldn't tell them apart. But thinking about it, this wasn't bad. As the only daughter of the Yardmaster, it was normal for her to have powerful methods to protect herself. Chinyu didn't know which one was the real Peach Girl. He asked the old turtle, and after a moment of silence, the old turtle's answer left Chinyu surprised. Both of them were fake. How smart! Chinyu's figure flickered. He approached the surface of the sea and howled far away. The sun and moon force field enveloped him, making him look like a black shadow. If Peach Girl could safely escape, that would be for the best. Although Chinyu had already prepared himself to pay any price for her, wasn't it better to live a peaceful life? Unless there was a hole in their brains, no one would want to approach death all the time. He arrived. Peach Girl was not too far away in the sea. He asked the old turtle several times to confirm. After obtaining a positive reply, Chinyu looked into the distance and sank back into the water. He would wait here. He would wait for Peach Girl to escape danger or for her to put his life on the line. Peach Girl was overtaken. Although she looked around and couldn't see anyone, she could still feel the coldness that was approaching her. She lifted a hand and pointed. The void violently shook and layers of fluctuations spread outwards, making it impossible for anything to hide. I never thought my luck would be so good. The one I chose was my main body. There was a low chuckle as a shadow emerged from the space fluctuations. What she saw was really just a shadow. She could only see the outline of his body and not the slightest trace of his facial features. Who are you? Miss Peach Girl, this is a very stupid question. I don't want to be torn to shreds by the angry Yardmaster in the future. So, I can only ask that you quickly die. The shadow suddenly rushed over, leaving behind a series of afterimages behind it like a thick black thread. It instantly approached and lifted a hand, pointing between Peach Girl's eyebrows. This finger was very strange. The speed was clearly slow, but Peach Girl looked as if she had lost her soul. She only stared blankly at it. No, that wasn't right. Although her eyes were dull, they were filled with anxiety. If one looked carefully, one could see that a fingertip peeking out from her sleeves was trembling. Peach Girl wanted to dodge, but she couldn't move at all. Pa! There was a light sound as the fingertip touched between her eyebrows. But at this time, the shadow suddenly coughed. There was another light sound. Almost at the same time, the shadow's eyebrows shattered and a hole appeared. It was as if his finger just now had struck Peach Girl, but he had to withstand it himself. But in the end, the one he struck was Peach Girl. The light in her eyes instantly dimmed. She was like a mirror that had fallen to the ground and shattered into countless fragments that tumbled about and rapidly dissipated. Shadow body. The shadow clenched his teeth. This finger had destroyed Peach Girl's shadow body, but he had also suffered a backlash from the shadow body. This was the same as receiving a full-strength strike. The shattered eyebrows wriggled and began to recover. But the speed wasn't too fast. Even though it was only a shadow, it was clearly no easy task for that shadow to possess the strength to kill Peach Girl. This was because it was a shadow that existed between reality and illusion. It was closely related to the main body. Humph! The shadow coldly coughed. He turned to leave, but then stopped. Since the shadow body had appeared, the other Peach Girl might not be real. After a moment of hesitation, the shadow took a deep breath and grasped downwards. A mass of seawater rose up, spreading out in front of him and forming a curtain of water. Countless tiny ripples appeared on the surface of the water curtain, as if countless grains of sand were quietly falling into it. Countless tiny ripples collided with each other. The water curtain, which should have been blurry, now displayed a clear image. It was as if the image that appeared in front of him was condensed from these colliding ripples. Peach Girl's figure appeared in the image. She took out the peach blossom congealing shadow body, turned around, and left. Just as Peach Girl was about to see more, the black figure suddenly let out a muffled groan, and the wound between her eyebrows that was healing suddenly exploded again. The ripples on the surface of the water curtain instantly turned chaotic, and the image vanished. Then it shattered into mist that returned to the East Sea. Damn it! The shadow clenched his teeth. Peach Girl really did have some secrets on her body. Even with his cultivation, he had still suffered a backlash. But luckily, he had already locked onto the true body. Shwa, the shadow, stepped forwards. His body rapidly faded away, vanishing in the blink of an eye. 10,000 feet of empty space in the deep sea. Peach Girl's fingers paused for a moment. The runes condensing at her fingertips suddenly shattered. As for similar runes, they were already densely packed in front of her. Light surged on their surface and flowed between them. She looked up. Her eyes deepened as if she could see what was happening in the distance. The first shadow body had already vanished. It was faster than she expected. For it to be able to smoothly kill the shadow body in such a short period of time, it was just as she thought. A saint had taken action, and it was strong, at least stronger than she had imagined. Sage Scholatry's actions were truly flawless. Looking at the dense runes in front of her, Peach Girl frowned. Reality proved that her initial estimates weren't sufficient. She needed to think of a way to buy more time. After several breaths of time, a sharp light flashed in Peach Girl's eyes. She could only take a risk. With a thought, a wisp of her aura passed through the empty space. Shwa, a shadow appeared in the air. He turned his head and looked into the distance. There, the aura of Peach Girl suddenly appeared. If he wasn't wrong, this was the second shadow body he had seen before. But this aura gave him a different feeling. Although the shadow body was said to be a complete copy of the main body, there were still some differences. This aura gave the shadow a very real feeling. It was so real that he suspected that what he saw before wasn't the truth. Just as the black shadow was hesitating, it locked onto the rapidly fleeing Peach Girl. Suddenly, its speed increased explosively. This was an astonishing increase, nearly on the same level as a saint. Even if Peach Girl's cultivation wasn't weak, and she had the trump cards given to her by the Garden Master, she still had to pay a tremendous price to accomplish this. A sharp light burst out from the shadow's eyes. In almost an instant, he saw through the truth. Peach Girl had exposed her second shadow body on her own initiative. She wanted to use her surreal aura to draw him over and buy time for her main body to escape. That's right, this was it. Otherwise, why would the second shadow body hidden in the sea release its aura on its own initiative? Humph! Peach Girl didn't know that she had already been exposed. Did she think she could deceive him with such a trivial trick? How ridiculous! Shwa, the shadow, instantly vanished, chasing after Peach Girl, who was speeding away. Right now, he was hovering between reality and illusion. Although he couldn't display the full strength of his main body, he still had other benefits, and his speed was several times faster than his main body. No matter how fast Peach Girl ran, Her fate was already sealed. Chapter 1233. In the sea, Qin Yu's eyes flashed. He had already guessed Peach Girl's intentions. She looked cold and indifferent on the surface, but she had a nimble heart, and she was decisive and bold enough. Of course, the most important thing was that Peach Girl had succeeded. The one chasing her had been led away by the second shadow body, buying time for the main body to escape. This made Qin Yu feel gratified. As he had said before, besides idiots, he would avoid risking his life as much as he could. He hoped that she would be able to escape smoothly. Bang! With a heaven-shaking explosion, Peach Girl was struck by a palm, and her body was instantly torn apart. Looking at her broken body tumbling away, even though it had no facial features, the oppressive aura around the shadow was enough to make it easy to guess what expression it had. It had been played. The one chasing her was a shadow body. Pa, pa. Light sounds constantly spread out from the shadow's body. Cracks began to appear on its body. If one killed a shadow body, they would have to withstand its backlash. Even if they were prepared for it, it still didn't feel good. But now, the shadow didn't have the time to savor the pain on its body or say some nonsense like interesting or let's see where you can run off to. This was because it had already made 2 mistakes. Peach Girl really might be able to escape. This time, no matter how precious the treasure it obtained was, if it failed, the punishment that awaited it would be even heavier. Shwa! The shadow didn't say a word. It flew straight towards Peach Girl. The second shadow body had been destroyed. Peach Girl pursed her lips and immediately composed herself. She had done everything she could. Now it all depended on who could be faster. Every breath of time could involve life and death. She lowered her head and continued to condense runes. Her speed wasn't fast or slow, and her fingers were as steady as before. Now, there were even more runes in front of her. They surrounded her like a small vortex. The overall layout of this vortex had been completed. Only a few nodes were left before it could be activated. Then, it would pierce through space and send her away. In normal circumstances, it wouldn't be so troublesome. But Sage Scholatry was fighting with the Yardmaster in the void boundary, and the shock waves were sweeping out. Ordinary world-breaking techniques were nearly useless. 5 nodes, 3 nodes, 2 nodes, and the last one. Time quietly passed. The empty space at the bottom of the sea was incomparably quiet. There was only the sound of Peach Blossom's dress as she condensed runes. Her face was slightly pale, and her forehead was filled with beads of sweat. Although the whirlpool in front of her seemed inconspicuous, it was able to create a safe space, tunnel, even under the attack of 2 true divines. It was definitely not ordinary. With Peach Blossom's cultivation realm, even if she didn't dare to pause for even a second, it would still be a huge burden on her. Fortunately, the vortex was about to be completed. The activation of the final node required 3 runes to be embedded, and they had to be perfectly matched with each other without the slightest deviation. It was the final and most crucial step in the formation of the entire teleportation whirlpool. 3 runes were floating in front of Peach Girl, and they approached each other bit by bit. She was constantly adjusting them and synchronizing them to the same frequency. The runes vibrated. The synchronization was complete. You're very smart, but it's a pity that you're still missing the final step. A black shadow suddenly appeared behind Peach and reached out to grab her neck. Let's end this. Even though she was the daughter of the Peach Blossom Garden's first wife, it was still extremely shameful for her to hunt down a junior. Anger was mixed with a trace of relief. This was the Black Shadow's current mood. Peach Blossom was really just a little bit away from escaping. Fortunately, everything had returned to the right track. After killing her, he would immediately leave East Sea and activate all the arrangements he had made, erasing all traces of his involvement in this matter. Gotcha! Peach Blossom's body froze, and the light in her eyes disappeared. The Black Shadow was silent. He looked at the corpse in front of him as it rapidly disintegrated and dissipated, finally turning into a broken peach branch. On this peach branch, One of the peach blossoms was withering and turning into powder. Kacha! The same cracking sound came from the black shadow. His body trembled, and he roared into the sky. 3 times. In the same ditch, he had fallen 3 times. This was no longer just shameful, but an unwashable humiliation. Not too far away, the seawater suddenly surged and was instantly pushed apart, forming an empty space. Peach Blossom sat cross-legged within. 3 runes floated in front of her, and around her was a transmission vortex that was just a step away from activating. Everything was exactly the same, just like a shadow body. However, what was being replicated was the entire empty space. The black shadow fiercely looked up. His eyes pierced through the seawater, and he saw another empty space that had appeared not too far away. Peach Blossom pushed forward. The 3 runes flew out and instantly fused into the vortex. The black shadow roared. The seawater around him instantly expanded and exploded, forming a pale white fog that swept out in all directions. Pa, pa, pa. A series of sounds came from the black shadow's body. The wound between his eyebrows broke apart once more. Large cracks appeared on his body, and his neck was bent at an abnormal angle. At this moment, the eruption of his full strength had already surpassed the limits of the black shadow's strength. The sudden and intense extraction of strength made it impossible for him to continue suppressing the damage he had just suffered. As a shadow that hovered between reality and illusion, his eruption of strength had already caused damage to his body. But even though he knew this, he still had to attack. No matter what, Peach Blossom couldn't leave here alive. Within the transmission vortex, Peach Blossom stared at the pale white fog that was howling towards her. She bore the brunt of the attack. She could clearly feel the terrifying strength contained within this fog. This was the unreserved eruption of a saint. Of course, this unreserved eruption also meant that he could no longer hide himself. Peach Blossom had already captured the aura of this saint. But this wasn't good news. This was because the saint chasing after him would surely know this as well. Unless he successfully killed Peach Blossom, his only fate would be to be torn to shreds by the enraged yardmaster. In other words, if there was no accident, this saint would change his previous intentions and kill Peach Blossom at all costs. The runes that formed the transmission vortex were rapidly activated and vibrated. Traces of the power of space erupted from within. Each strand wasn't too strong, but when they fused together, they seemed to have an effect far greater than 2, and now there were hundreds and thousands of runes stacked on top of each other. Thus, it only took an instant for an incomparably powerful spatial vibration to wrap around Peach Blossom. Her figure suddenly blurred. In the next moment, she would break through the boundary and follow the predetermined direction of transmission to return to the Peach Garden. At that time, let alone a mere half-saint, even a true saint wouldn't be able to harm her. At this moment, the pale white fog arrived and crazily battered the transmission vortex. Peach Blossom frowned. The saint behind the shadow had clearly touched upon the laws of space. Thus, when he erupted, there were obvious fluctuations of interference. The transmission vortex continued to spin, but its speed suddenly slowed down. Although this attack could only delay the vortex for a single breath of time, for a saint, this was more than enough time for them to accomplish many things. For example, killing someone. The shadow ignored his own injuries and stepped forward. He lifted his hand and grasped out. "Stay here." Roar. There was a sudden roar. A terrifying figure appeared in the deep sea. He allowed the raging waves of the sea to batter him as he punched out. The moment this punch came out, light and darkness erupted at the same time. They fused together and then suddenly spread out. Light and darkness domain. The shadow was locked within. His all-out attack filled with hatred was blocked by the domain. Light and darkness violently twisted, wildly spinning around each other. Chin Yu stuffily coughed. Blood gushed out from his nose and mouth as he was sent flying far away. His first thought was that it was so strong. There was indeed a massive disparity between saints. When the light and darkness domain descended, it was able to resist Chinyu for a moment. But now, the shadow's attack had severely wounded Chinyu. His second thought was that Peach Blossom had already left. He had clearly seen that the transmission vortex was just a moment away from activating. By blocking the shadow's attack, he had bought enough time. His third thought was that he sighed with emotion at the fates of life. Indeed, there were some fates that couldn't be avoided just because you didn't want to. The shadow was too strong, so strong that you couldn't find any chance of victory. Then, he could only run away. Just as Yu was about to run away, the shadow emitted an angry roar. The transaction had failed. Peach Blossom had escaped right in front of his eyes. He originally had a chance to make up for his mistake and keep her here. Shua, the shadow had no eyes. But at this moment, Yu felt as if his heart had been pierced through and his heartbeat suddenly stopped. Die! The shadow punched out. Rumble, rumble. Mountain phantoms filled the skies, and the light and darkness domain instantly shattered. Then, with an unstoppable momentum, they came crashing down on Yu. Since Peach Blossom had escaped, he was destined to be exposed. There was no need for him to hide anymore. Since that was the case, he would tear apart the boy who had caused all of this. Within the transmission vortex, Peach Blossom's eyes widened as she looked at Yu's back. Didn't he leave? How could he appear here? Then, an intense thought instantly destroyed all reason and logic, completely occupying Peach Blossom's mind. Save him. She had to save him. The mountain phantoms came crashing down on him. Yu bitterly smiled. Indeed, when it came to saving a damsel in distress, he had to act according to his own abilities. Just as his thoughts stirred and he was about to summon the furnace and pray that its astonishing defensive capabilities could resist a saint, there was a light cracking sound behind him. It was very light. When a saint erupted with the full strength of a saint, the light and darkness domain shattered and the undercurrents raged on the seabed. It wasn't worth mentioning at all. But for some unknown reason, this cracking sound was clearly transmitted into Yu's ears. Subconsciously turning his head, he saw the blurry figure of Peach Blossom in the transmission vortex. She lifted a hand and placed it between her eyebrows. Then, another phantom appeared behind her. It stepped forwards, passing through Peach Blossom's body and breaking it into countless pieces. Bang! There was a heaven-shaking explosion. Yu was instantly sent flying away by the shaking force. Blood gushed out from his nose and mouth a second time as he was grabbed by Peach Blossom and pulled into the vortex. In the next moment, space suddenly twisted. Intense vibrations filled the air, and everything fell into darkness. The transmission vortex vanished, and the black shadow also stopped. All that was left was the tumbling seawater, roaring and shaking. He stared at the place where Peach Blossom and Yu had left. He stretched out a hand, as if he were silently sensing something. After several breaths of time, the black shadow drew back his hand and looked up. He seemed to be withstanding some sort of intense pain, and his body shivered. Then, the darkness around his body rapidly faded away. Clear facial features appeared on his blank face. When the black shadow stopped shivering and stood up straight once more, he had transformed into a young man with a grim expression. You save me, and I save you. The love between a man and a woman is truly one of the most wonderful things in the world. But this is also good. At least it gives me another chance to make up for my mistake. You can't escape. He didn't speak nonsense because he wasn't in a hurry. Rather, it was because he needed time to lock onto the traces of spatial fluctuations and determine their approximate direction. Silence would only make things awkward. It would be better to say a few words of transitional time. The young man had no expression. I found you. He punched out a fist. Space suddenly shattered, and he stepped inside. Yu felt as if his entire body would fall apart. Just as he thought that he would be tossed to his death, the chaotic space strength that wrapped around him suddenly vanished without a trace. In the next moment, light arrived. He subconsciously closed his eyes. Then, he forcefully endured the discomfort and opened them again. His teary eyes swept around. Although he couldn't see clearly, his luck was good. There weren't any threats nearby. He forcefully blinked his eyes, displaying the strength of a cultivator. Chinyu had already begun to adapt to the bright light here. He looked down at Peach Blossom. Although he was tightly holding on to her, she was still in a poor state. Her face was pale, without the least bit of blood. As Chinyu was looking at her, Peach Blossom suddenly opened her eyes. The two of them looked at each other. Subconsciously, his entire body turned cold. This was because Peach Blossom's eyes were far too indifferent. It was so indifferent that it was like she was looking at nothing but air. There was no focus or any fluctuation in her emotions. Chinyu furrowed his eyebrows. "Senior apprentice sister?" Peach Blossom said, "I'm fine." She stood up and looked around. Looking at her movements, it didn't seem like there was anything wrong with her. But as Chinyu thought back to when she was defeated by Refinement One, he felt that something wasn't right. Moreover, the changes in Peach Blossom were far too obvious. There was a problem. There was definitely a problem. Subconsciously, Chinyu thought back to when he blocked the Black Shadow's attack. Peach Blossom had slapped him between the eyebrows and shattered that phantom. Could it be that Peach Blossom's changes were related to this? He looked at Peach Blossom. It was clear that she had no intention of continuing to speak about this matter. Moreover, the current situation wasn't clear yet. Chinyu could only take a deep breath and temporarily suppress this thought. "Senior apprentice sister, where are we now?" Peach Blossom shook her head. "I don't know." "Chinyu, big sister, didn't you set up a destination for this transmission vortex?" Peach Blossom looked at him. After a moment of silence, she said, "It's not enough for two people." He understood. The power of the transmission vortex could only send one person to a designated location. But in the end, Peach Blossom had pulled Chinyu into it. The transmission vortex itself had been destroyed, so it was impossible for them to reach the designated location. No wonder the entire transmission process had been so bumpy. In fact, it was already a great stroke of luck that the transmission vortex had been able to send the two of them here. In a state that exceeded the limits of what it could bear, it had forcefully activated the transmission vortex. Moreover, it hadn't collapsed midway and thrown the two of them into the turbulent flows of space. Wasn't that already amazing? As Chinyu thought of this, a cold sweat began to drip down his forehead. Although he didn't know what would happen if the transmission vortex collapsed, his intuition told him that it wasn't something he wanted to experience. Chapter 1234. Since they had safely left, there was no need to think too much about it. It was better to scare themselves. Moreover, there was a critical problem right now. If they hadn't arrived at the predetermined location, would they be able to escape the pursuit of a saint? As if sensing Chinyu's questioning gaze, Peach Girl lightly said, "I can't be sure." Then, she swayed and closed her eyes before falling backwards. Chinyu jumped up in fright. He hurriedly reached out to grab her, but there was no more movement. Luckily, her aura was stable. She had just said that she was fine and had put on an expression as if there was nothing wrong with her. But in the blink of an eye, she had fainted. Chinyu was left speechless for a second. He frowned. Looking at the unconscious Peach Girl, he was even more certain that there was something wrong with her. He had to find a way to investigate this. When it came to Ningling and Yuqi, his attitude was firm. But now wasn't the time. Peach Girl had just said that she couldn't be sure. In other words, there was a chance that the saint would continue to hunt them down. And regardless of whether or not her judgment was accurate, even if there was only a 1% chance, after personally experiencing the formidable strength of the saint behind that shadow, Chinyu couldn't take such a risk again. He would hide first. Chinyu picked up Peach Girl and looked around. In a completely unfamiliar place, there was limited meaning in looking around. He quickly chose a direction and then held away. Everything Chinyu did now was assuming that the saint would continue to hunt them down. Thus, every breath of time he had was incomparably precious. He couldn't waste anything. He had to create as many conditions as possible for the two of them to be safe. The blazing sun hung high above his head, but the earth wasn't dry. In addition to the humid air and the lush vegetation, It wasn't hard for Chinyu to infer the approximate climate here. He looked up at the skies. Although the sun was high in the sky, it was clear that clouds had gathered. It wouldn't be long before there was a heavy downpour. He looked at the unconscious Peach Girl in his arms. Letting her soak in the rain wasn't a good choice. It seemed he would have to find a place to stay as soon as possible. As he was thinking of this, the old turtle that had been digesting the soul meal of the Forge 1 card suddenly spoke up. Stop! It was abrupt without any prelude. But Chinyu came to a sudden stop the moment he heard it. He stuffily coughed, and his chest heaved up and down. He let out a deep breath and said, "What is it?" "Master, don't talk. Step back little by little. Don't make any noise." The voice of the old turtle was trembling. Chinyu didn't say a word. He subconsciously hugged Peach Girl tightly and slowly moved backwards. Of course, this would take up a lot of time, but the more he understood the old turtle, the more he understood that he couldn't act recklessly now. Everything was very quiet. The lush vegetation in front of him made it impossible to see any abnormalities. There was not the slightest bit of abnormalities. After retreating 1,000 feet away, the old turtle let out a long breath. Run, run. Chinyu subconsciously moved. His figure crossed hundreds of feet, and he was about to turn and leave. But in the next moment he stopped. The old turtle was anxious. "Master, my master, why did you stop? Hurry up, don't delay any longer, let's run." Chinyu didn't dare to take a deep breath. He stared at the bulging hill. "What's in front? I can't believe you're so scared." "I don't know." The old turtle hurriedly explained. "I was afraid that I would wake it up, so I didn't dare to sense it too much. But this thing is similar to the spirit bodies in the endless sea. They are both bred by the world itself. I just ate a spirit body. If it were to discover me, I would definitely be in trouble." As he finished speaking, he seemed to realize something. He coughed and said, "I just don't want to stir up any trouble for Master. After all, we are currently running away." Chinyu's eyes flashed. "Is it strong?" "Strong. Compared to the one in the endless sea in front of me, it is at most a slightly stronger child. The disparity is far too great. Master, to be honest, I am very interested in it. But this fellow isn't someone we can provoke right now." The old turtle only had one goal in persuading Chinyu, and that was to hurry up and run as far as possible. Chinyu's eyes revealed a struggle, but he soon made a decision. "Shut up and hide your aura. If it senses you, I will crush you to pieces." Here it comes again. It's the same old catchphrase. I've already made it clear to you. If we hurry up and leave, then we'll be fine. Why do you have to go through all this trouble? Isn't it better to live in peace? Ridicule was ridicule, but the old turtle had already figured out Chinyu's character. Once he decided on something, it was impossible to pull him back. He could only desperately try his best to curl up into a ball like a real turtle, pulling his hands and feet into his shell. As for the rest, he could only resign himself to his fate. To encounter such a master who wouldn't feel comfortable if he didn't toss and turn, he was helpless and filled with despair. Chinyu glanced at Peach Girl and hesitated for a moment. Then, his figure flickered and he turned to leave. The old turtle was overjoyed. He thought that the sun had risen from the west. Just as he made his decision, he turned around and swallowed it. But this joy only lasted for a short period of time. Chinyu swept his divine sense around and didn't sense anything wrong. He put Peach Girl down. After a moment of hesitation, Chinyu inwardly said that he had offended her. He reached out and grabbed a strand of her hair and cut it off. Then, without hesitation, he turned and hurried back the way he came, heading straight for that mountain. "Master, shut up." Chinyu didn't stop. He flew until he wasn't too far away from the mountain. Then he landed. He carefully moved back to the place where he first stopped. He stood firm and waited for several breaths of time. There was no problem. He stretched out his hand and spread out his fingers. A strong wind blew past, and the strand of hair instantly left his hand and flew away. Rumble, rumble, there was a muffled sound coming from above. The sky was much darker than it had been at the start. It was going to rain. Chinyu turned and left. After another period of careful movement, he left the danger zone and soared into the skies. He found Peach Girl and held her in his arms. Without hesitation, Chinyu raced off in the opposite direction. Although he didn't know whether or not the preparations he had made just now had any effect, he knew that there was a great horror here, so it wasn't wrong to hide as far away as possible. An hour later, a bolt of lightning flashed through the dark skies, and a torrential downpour followed by billowing thunderclaps in the distance. Whoosh! The curtain of rain was torn apart. Holding on to Peach Girl, Chinyu broke into the cave. In the darkness, faint green eyes lit up. Several natives faced this uninvited guest and roared out threateningly. But unfortunately, the difference in strength between the two sides was too great. With muffled sounds of flesh and blood, several shadows were thrown into the curtain of rain. They crawled up and ran away with their tails between their legs, vanishing without a trace. He didn't kill them because he was worried that the smell of blood would be discovered. Although the possibility wasn't high, it wasn't wrong to be cautious in the current situation. With a thought, a mass of light bloomed above his head, illuminating the cave. In Chinyu's arms, Peach Girl was still unconscious. In order to ensure a safe distance, he had hurried a bit further. As a result, she was soaked in the rain. She wore a long pink dress. It was unknown what material it was made of, but after Peach Girl fell unconscious, it seemed much softer. After being soaked in the rain, it faintly turned translucent. As it clung to her body, it made the scene in front of her seem much more lively. But Chinyu didn't reveal anything strange in his eyes. He stretched out a finger and placed it between her eyebrows. After several breaths of time, he drew back and let out a breath. Luckily, although she was still unconscious, her aura was still stable. Compared to before, it hadn't worsened. With a thought, hot steam gushed out, instantly evaporating the rain on their bodies. In the next moment, he released the sun-moon force field, covering the two of them. After doing all this, Chinyu looked up at the sphere of light floating in the air. With a light cracking sound, it shattered and dissipated. The cave was plunged into darkness once more. Outside, storms raged and thunder roared. The air was filled with the smell of decay, mixed with heat and humidity. As the heavy rain poured down, all traces left behind by the two intruders, besides those strands of hair that were deliberately left behind, were cleaned up. A piece of the curtain of rain seemed to be missing, as if it had been swallowed up by an invisible mouth. The young man stepped out. He looked up at the skies and couldn't help but frown. It seemed that he didn't like rainy weather. But soon, the young man's mood brightened, because this time, he didn't waste his strength. Although it was very weak, he was still able to sense familiar spatial fluctuations. It was here. He didn't break through the barrier to leave again. This was a smart choice, because in front of a Saint Tao who had grasped the space laws, breaking through the barrier again would be incomparably clear. It would be far better to hide where he was and perhaps live a little longer. Of course, it would only be a little longer. His main body arriving here meant that he was involved in karma. Even if he smoothly killed Peach Girl, there was a chance that he would be locked on afterwards. But after his main body arrived, the most obvious change was that he could erupt with his greatest strength. A saint attacking with all his strength was far more terrifying than trying to hide. Where could these two little things hide? With a thought, he swept out in all directions. But, to his surprise, he didn't find anything. Had he already sensed something and made up for it? He was smart enough. But even if he couldn't lock onto his aura, it still wasn't too difficult for a Saint Tao to hunt him down. "I'm coming for you," the young man chuckled. He took a step forwards and instantly vanished from sight. Although it was unlikely that Peach Girl and Chinyu were still at the place where they had entered, he still had to leave. Perhaps he could find some traces. He vanished and then reappeared, crossing endless space. In front of him was the place where Peach Girl and Chinyu had appeared. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled in the howling winds and torrential rain. The young man squatted down and touched the ground, sniffing it. With a flick of his finger, all the dirt and grime fell off. Even the wind and rain around him couldn't stain him in the slightest. The Saint Tao was impervious to all things. This was just child's play. This way, as his voice fell, The young man took another step forwards. Perhaps it was because he wanted to accurately lock onto their whereabouts, or perhaps it was out of caution, but the distance he crossed this time was much shorter. Even so, after several steps, he arrived at the place where Chin Yu had left behind his hair. The young man's figure appeared. He took a deep breath and smiled. The fragrance of peach blossoms. Are you two here? He looked up. His gaze pierced through the rain and fell on a distant hill. The lush and green vegetation swayed in the howling winds and rain. The leaves were slapped by the rain, emitting crackling sounds. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. The young man didn't continue tearing apart space. He walked through the rain, his eyes roaming over the hill, a thoughtful look in his eyes. Being sensitive to scents was his innate ability. It had helped him a lot in his cultivation journey. He didn't expect that he would have to use it today to hunt down 2 juniors. It would be shameful to say it out loud. Fortunately, unless he was locked onto by the yardmaster, this matter was destined to become one of the secrets he would never tell anyone in his life. If he was unlucky and was locked onto by the yardmaster, his life would be in danger. How could he be in a mood to care about losing face? He was thinking too much. As expected, even I would feel nervous before I actually killed Peach. After all, this matter was likely to involve cutting off the great path of a true saint. Moreover, the target was a peerless powerhouse like the yardmaster, who had long stood at the peak of the Saint Tao and was only a step away from becoming a ruler. The karma involved was so great that once it erupted, it would definitely cause a great sensation in the entire vast Yang world. The young man took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. A smile appeared on his face. When he accepted the reward, he had already made preparations to deal with everything. What was the use of being nervous now? Let's do it. He lifted his hand, but at this moment, as if he had sensed something, the young man frowned and maintained the action of lifting his hand. His 5 fingers remained motionless. No matter what, he couldn't complete the next clench. Heavy rain poured down. The young man stood in front of the hill and raised his hand forward, motionless. But while he didn't move, the hill in front of him moved. With a roar, the hill collapsed and the ground cracked. Countless lush plants were instantly torn into pieces by the terrifying power. A giant claw reached out from the broken ground, repelled the flying rain, and went straight for the young man. He was tricked again. Looking at the terrifying giant claw, this was the first thought that popped up in the young man's mind. To be honest, the feeling of being tricked was really unpleasant, especially for a proud and powerful Saint Tao cultivator. He had been toyed with by 2 juniors who were not much stronger than ants in his eyes time and time again. Anger filled his chest and inevitably affected his mind. This made the young man make a decision that he regretted greatly. Without dodging, the young man raised his hand and punched at the giant claw. In terms of pure size, the young man wasn't even 1/100th the size of this giant claw. But strength was never determined by size. Bang! There was a heaven-shaking explosion, and a terrifying impact of strength instantly erupted. The curtain of rain for 1,000 miles was cut in half, leaving nothing but emptiness. Countless raindrops shot out, whistling through the air. Every drop contained the shockwaves of strength of a Saint Tao collision. They were like incomparably fine meteors from beyond the heavens. They brought with them the force of tens of thousands of caddies as they smashed into the earth, tearing open countless terrifying holes. The earth trembled and cried out in grief. The young man didn't move at all. The giant claw that broke through the earth was repelled and smashed into the dirt. You dare to be insolent towards me? How bold of you! With an icy shout, the temperature between the heavens and earth crazily fell. The falling raindrops froze into ice in midair. Peepa, peepa, ice particles smashed into the ground. Everything fell silent. The young man sneered. You're lucky today. I have no intention of entangling myself with you. As he spoke, he turned and left. He had already seen the strands of hair that flew out when the earth collapsed, and he understood how he had been schemed against. He certainly wouldn't stay here any longer. In his chest, killing intent and anger wove together, burning without end. "You, how bold!" A deep voice echoed out from deep beneath the earth, seeming to resonate with the world around it. It swept out from all directions like great waves. The young man's complexion changed. He stepped forwards and space shook. He was about to tear open space and leave, but he stopped in the next moment. The shaking space seemed to be wiped away by an invisible hand, instantly returning to normal, and this was only what could be seen on the surface. The truth was that the entire area of space was covered by invisible shackles. Or, to be more accurate, the space laws were sealed away at this moment, unable to be used. Bang, bang, the earth constantly broke apart. Massive tracts of mountain forests instantly disintegrated. A terrifying aura erupted from within, blotting out the skies. After colliding head-on with a saint, this great beast that had scared away the old turtle had finally awakened from its deep slumber. Chapter 1235. In the pitch-black cave, Chinyu suddenly opened his eyes. Just then, a clap of thunder exploded, lighting up his bright eyes. Putting down Peach Girl, he stood up and walked to the entrance of the cave. Outside, the storm was as strong as before, and the rain was like a broken curtain, completely obscuring his vision. But this didn't affect Chinyu at all. He could feel the terrifying fluctuations between heaven and earth. Even though he was far away, his heart still palpitated. The trap he had risked his life to make had been triggered. Chinyu's first thought was that the old turtle was right. The thing under the hill was really ridiculously strong. His personal experience of fighting with the shadow was enough for him to make this judgment. His plan had succeeded, and he had caused the saint to fall into a trap. Of course, this was something worth bragging about. But in fact, Chinyu didn't feel happy at all. Looking at the center of the eruption of the terrifying fluctuations, he subconsciously frowned. The trap had been triggered, which meant that the saint had arrived. He and Peach Girl would once again have to face the cruel pursuit of the other party. Why was it described as cruel? Ha! If you were played by these two little things who were not even worth mentioning in your eyes, would your heart burn with rage? What a simple truth. If they really fell into the hands of this saint, perhaps death would be the best relief for them. If he could, Chinyu would rather all his schemes end up in vain. But unfortunately, things in this world never changed according to one's will. What had already happened, and there was no point in thinking more. Now, Chinyu's only hope was that the thing under the hill was strong enough. Even if he didn't expect it to kill the saint, he could still accept it if it scared him away. The heavy rain continued for an entire night. When the sky began to brighten, it finally stopped. The slightly lowered temperature began to rise again. As a large amount of water vapor rose, a hot and humid feeling inevitably gushed out from the bottom of his heart. Chinyu took a deep breath and then slowly exhaled. The distant battle also stopped as the sky brightened. He didn't know what the result was, but after fighting for an entire night, even as a saint, it wasn't easy. Whether the other party retreated or not, it would buy him and Peach Girl a lot of time. He hoped that the yardmaster could come as soon as possible. The young man's face was pale, and his robe was torn in many places. He was gasping for breath and looked quite miserable. Chinyu's guess wasn't wrong. It wasn't easy for him, and it could even be said that he had suffered a great loss. The giant beast that had been awakened was not very strong. At the very least, there was still a gap between it and him. However, for some unknown reason, the other party was actually able to resonate with the heavens and earth here. Fighting it here was equivalent to entering the other party's domain. His hands and feet were tied, and after fighting for an entire night, not only did he fail to kill the other party, he even suffered a few blows, and his injuries were not light. He looked calm on the surface, but in the young man's chest, raging killing intent roiled endlessly. The coldness in his eyes seemed capable of freezing everything. Ever since he stepped into the saint realm, it had been a long time since he had suffered such a great loss. Although this was the result of a great battle with a giant beast, in the end, the blame still fell on Peach Maiden and Chinyu, these two juniors. The young man took a deep breath and looked up in the direction of the giant beast. A cold light surged in his eyes like waves. None of you can escape. None of you can escape. Chinyu hoped that the Yarmaster could rush over as soon as possible. Of course, the young man also knew that he had delayed for far too long, far exceeding the time of his agreement with Sage Scholatry. The Yardmaster was real, and she could arrive at any moment. He had to hurry. Thus, after a moment of hesitation, the young man chose to forcefully suppress his injuries. However, this would inevitably cause some damage to his Great Tao. The Great Tao was the foundation of the Saint Realm. If this were any other time, the young man would never make this choice. But now, he could only accept it. He lifted a hand and touched his forehead. With a light humph, the young man's complexion quickly turned ruddy at a speed visible to the naked eye. His panting gradually stopped, and most of his dispirited aura was restored. Shwa, his figure flickered, and the young man instantly vanished. After discovering the existence of the giant beast and setting up a trap here, whether it was to avoid being implicated or to instinctively avoid it, one would choose to run as far away from this place as possible. In other words, this direction was where Peach Maiden and Sheen you were most likely to be. Space surged, and the young man stepped out. He closed his eyes, and his Saint Tao swept out, blotting out the world. But soon, his complexion darkened, and he coldly snorted. His Saint Tao was obstructed by an invisible force, and its range of coverage and accuracy were greatly reduced. It was that giant beast. Damn it. Killing those two little fellows was the most important task right now. If there was a chance in the future, he would definitely find two helpers to kill it. Since he couldn't deal with this giant beast for the time being, thinking about it was just a waste of time. The young man took a deep breath and slowly swept his eyes around. At the start, he made a rational judgment. But after arriving here, a clear intuition appeared in his heart. They were here, the mountains and forests in front of him. All of them were likely hiding places for Peach Maiden and Shinyu. The young man couldn't determine where they were hiding, but that didn't mean he couldn't kill them. There were some things he couldn't imagine because his boundary wasn't high enough. Since it was likely that Peach Maiden and Shinyu were here, he would slowly push through them. Simple and crude. Perhaps the efficiency was a bit low and he would inevitably waste energy, but the advantage was that it was absolutely effective. As long as they were here, they would be found sooner or later. This was currently the only and best method. The young man suddenly said, "I want to see just how long you can hide for." Under the support of his Saint Tao, it was like thunder exploding in the skies. Billowing sound waves spread out in all directions, constantly shaking the world. He lifted a hand and pressed forward. Bang! With a heaven-shaking explosion, the ground instantly collapsed and disintegrated. A terrifying strength smashed into the earth, turning everything for 10 miles into powder. The rage of the Saint Tao caused blood to flow for 1,000 miles. With this strike, disregarding all vegetation, all flesh and blood life that lived here were exterminated in despair. The young man was expressionless, as if he didn't realize the consequences of his strike. But it was likely that he knew everything but didn't care at all. The Saint Tao could soar above the highest heavens. All beneath them were ants. This wasn't just referring to the disparity in life, order, and strength, but also an indifferent attitude that came from the depths of his heart. Thus, the young man was able to use thunderous methods without any hesitation. He didn't hesitate to exterminate all life in order to kill Peach Maiden and Shinyu. After his strike failed, the young man lifted his hand and pressed down again. A heaven-shaking explosion erupted once more, and another 10 miles of land was destroyed. Bang! Bang! Loud explosions rang out without end. The world shook and all life cried out in despair. The cave trembled. Chinyu's complexion darkened, and shock appeared in his eyes. He had never considered himself to be a soft-hearted and merciful individual. After cultivating to this point, his hands were stained with blood, but this degree of crazy slaughter still surpassed the limits of his understanding. Now, every time the earth shook, it meant that countless lives would fall into destruction. Was this a Saint Tao? But soon, Qin Yu had no choice but to force himself to wake up from his shock. This was because he knew what the final goal of a Saint Dao's wanton slaughter was. Or, to be more cruel, these lives that were slaughtered were all implicated by him and Peach Maiden. Of course, Qin Yu felt a bit guilty, but he wasn't pedantic to the point where he wished he was dead. Moreover, he wasn't in the mood to think too much about this right now. This was because saints were extremely strong and their speed of destruction was extremely fast. And, more importantly, they had judged his initial subconscious desire to avoid them, so it wouldn't be long before they arrived here. He had miscalculated. If he knew this would happen, he would have changed directions or gone in the opposite direction. But it was useless to regret now. What should he do when the time came? Fight desperately. Forget it. Qin Yu couldn't find a chance of victory, so he could only continue running away or think of a way to delay for time. He glanced at the unconscious Peach Maiden. Qin Yu's first thought was that he should stir up another wave of trouble. For instance, he could quietly circle around to the opposite side of the hill and expose some things to attract the Saint Dao over. That should be able to buy some time. However, Qin Yu only had this thought for a brief moment before he suppressed it. Disregarding whether or not the Saint Dao who had been tricked by them would continue to fall for their tricks. Even if he did fall for their tricks, would Qin Yu be able to escape? Even if he grasped the space laws, facing a saint who also grasped the space laws, trying to show off was the same as seeking death. It was likely that as soon as Qin Yu stirred up a commotion, that person would arrive and he would die. It wasn't just Qin Yu. He also had to bring Peach Maiden with him. Otherwise, in her unconscious state, she wouldn't be able to hide her aura and she would be quickly locked onto. He couldn't continue stirring up another wave of trouble. In other words, he could only rely on his luck. The good news was that the sun and moon force field was effective. It perfectly shielded their auras, forcing the Saint Dao to resort to this method. Moreover, Qin Yu subconsciously wanted to hide further away, so he flew a bit further in the rain. There was still some distance between him and the Saint Dao, although each strike could destroy an area of 10 miles. If he was lucky enough, it would still take a long time for him to reach this place. Perhaps the yardmaster would have arrived by then. Of course, this would be the best result. However, a clear-headed and rational person naturally wouldn't think of everything in a positive light. Moreover, so much time had passed, and the yardmaster hadn't arrived yet. Perhaps there had been some changes. Therefore, the best way to survive was to rely on himself. He couldn't avoid it, and he couldn't escape. If he wanted to survive, with so many restrictions, there was probably only one way left. Kill the Saint Dao. It was simple, direct, and powerful. As long as the Saint Dao died, Qin Yu and Peach Maiden would certainly be able to survive. Although he had killed Lien Yi successfully before, more or less taking advantage of him, he had become a Saint Dao slayer now. Therefore, Qin Yu dared to think. Not only did he dare to think, but he also began to silently try to deduce the probability of success. There's also a difference in strength between saints, and the difference was very shocking. No matter what, Lien Yi couldn't be compared to the Saint Dao behind the Black Shadow. Of course, Qin Yu didn't know that the Saint Dao had personally arrived. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't have dared to have such a bold idea. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.